Today is the 20th of September 2023, and this is a conversation between Emilio Longo and Michael Klein. Michael, welcome to Skill-Based Art, a learning resource for art students and artist teachers. I appreciate your willingness to speak with me today.
Thank you, Amelia.
Great, well, let's get a start, Michael. Now, Michael, you are a North Dakota native who is part of the reclaimed tradition in American representational painting, which has its roots in Renaissance and French academic technique and aesthetics. You are a strong advocate for the return to beauty in art, and you have dedicated your life to achieving this goal. Successful at exhibiting and selling your work both in the United States and abroad, you have had 7 solo exhibitions in the US from 2008 to 2021 and partaken in a multitude of group shows, as well as being included in the American Chinese All Painting Artists League, ACOPAL, a prestigious exhibition at the World Art Museum in Beijing that saw American and Chinese realist artists collaborate. The exhibition traveled through China, hitting 5 major cities in 2012. In 2014, you won the Grand Central Atelier Still Life competition with your painting titled The Art Spirit, and in 2016, you were awarded the prestigious William F. Draper Grand Prize at the Portrait Society of America's International Portrait Competition for your portrait titled NYC Entrepreneur. Your work is featured in permanent collections including the C.S. Lewis Institute and the New Salem Museum and Academy of Fine Art. Internationally recognized as a credible teacher, you have taught workshops all around the world, including Italy, China, Argentina, and South Africa. You are represented by Anne Long Fine Art, Collins Galleries, Maxwell Alexandra Gallery, and Palm Avenue Fine Art. Your work has been published in numerous magazines such as Fine Art Connoisseur, American Artist Magazine, and American Arts Quarterly. In your work, you place the greatest importance on being truthful to life and your own lived experiences, which is demonstrated through sensitive draftsmanship and masterful paint handling. Today you live in New Salem, Massachusetts, where you paint, teach workshops, and enjoy the diverse art community, cultural climate, and museum gardens. You also travel frequently with your wife, Nelida, to her hometown in Buenos Aires, Argentina, where you maintain a second studio surrounded by timeless beauty. Michael, reminiscing back to your childhood, you were born in 1980 in a small town called Minot in North Dakota. Your father was a dentist and your mother a stay-at-home mum who previously studied as a hygienist. Your parents met in Chicago while in dental school. In your youth, you developed a special connection with nature and a desire to describe your world accurately. Can you provide an account of your childhood experiences growing up in the Midwest and how this influenced your outlook on life?
Yeah, so thank you for that introduction. Growing up in North Dakota was a unique experience, basically because it's a small town in the Midwest. There's not a lot of exposure to museums, that kind of thing. So, I grew up with 2 older brothers. I'm the youngest of 3, and just basically was always drawn to the arts. I have always kind of dabbled in drawing and painting and interested in comics and all that sort of thing. So, just as a child, I think I had kind of enough time to be relatively inquisitive. And so that's how I grew up, kind of, dabbling in sports and whatnot. But for the most part, I was always drawn to artistic things.
Sure. Now, I understand you began drawing cartoons at the age of 8, and by 10, you had your own set of oil paints. In your teenage years, you began looking at National Geographic photos, and you would copy them photorealistically. Was your drawing ability innate, or did you have to work hard to hone it?
I think it was definitely innate. I think the story is pretty common across the board for people, colleagues and friends, who I've listened to and understood that, in childhood, everyone had a tendency to gravitate towards drawing. And yeah, I think it's something that a lot of people were just gifted with from the onset.
Sure. At the age of 14, I understand your father took a photo of a homeless man and you created an acrylic painting based on this photo. You attribute this to be your first successful painting. What was your experience of painting this picture, and did you feel addicted to painting from this point forward?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. Uh, I think that that experience as a younger man, essentially kind of dabbling in the fine arts. Um, I was exploring for um, just my own technical kind of ways of going about trying to figure it out. So basically, kind of gridded out the photo and painted it as best I could, and it was just it was a impactful experience because it was I think pretty advanced for being so young. So yeah, it definitely kind of had it affected my trajectory as I went forward.
Sure. And I understand you were inspired by Bob Ross in your youth. Is that correct, Michael?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, he was a huge, uh, as a young painter, I was
Sure.
very much inspired. Yeah.
Right. So this painting that you created of the homeless gentleman, I understand you had set up your parents' garage into a small painting studio, and by the age of 14, you were pretty much you had a studio set up and you were painting away.
Yeah, yeah. It was, it was a little bit chaotic and not as organized as you would expect when you hear, you know, that someone had a studio set up. But yeah, definitely, I would go from my bedroom to the garage and be painting, as I was doing other stuff. So
Hmm.
yeah,
You attended Minot High School between 1995 to 1999. Academically, you weren't very successful in school. Were you not interested in learning at the time, or did you just want to focus your attention on drawing and painting?
yeah, that's an excellent question. I think if I could go back and relive the experience, obviously I would focus a lot more. And I don't think it was that I was, um, not able to concentrate, but I definitely had a lot of distractions. And just being at the culture of the small town, there was just a lot of kind of you could get into trouble pretty easily. I wasn't focused on my studies, so yeah, painting and drawing wasn't necessarily the thing that distracted me though.
Were you troublesome in your youth, Michael?
A little bit, yeah. Not to the point of where I would like, you know, um, be sent off or something like that, but definitely I give my parents a hard time.
Sure. Whilst in high school, you saw a John Singer Sargent painting on the cover of American Artist magazine, which was the first time you had encountered traditional painting of that caliber. How did seeing this painting impact your life?
In a very, very profound way, actually. That was the first time I had seen um, a 19th century painting. I was familiar with, you know, artists like Andrew Wyeth and just Norman Rockwell and that sort of thing. But this really stood out in my mind as something completely different and unique. And I was just, I think, the natural sensitivity I had to understanding drawing and color and that sort of thing, it really drew me in. So yeah, that was a big life-changing moment, actually.
Sure. Whilst flicking through the American Artist magazine, I understand the price of the paintings appealed to you and you believe that this is something you could do for a living. Would you say this is the point that you decided you would become an artist?
Yeah, I think that was the point that I saw a glimmer of hope to change the situation I was in. Um, So I knew that uh, I definitely knew that I had a handle on the materials enough to be able to make something like what I was seeing. So, and I think that is, again, just kind of a rare situation because not having any classical training at that point, I was a teenager, just flipping through a magazine for my first time. I was really convinced that uh, the work just wasn't that good. And we're talking about like 20th century, portraits from the South. The bar wasn't very high.
Hmm.
I'm not, it wasn't like the 19th century stuff. So, just seeing some of the work in the magazine, it felt like it was something I could probably do.
Sure. So your exposure to traditional realist art was quite limited in your youth, Michael. I mean, you were living in Minot, North Dakota, which is a relatively small town. There weren't many museums around. Of course, you were inspired by Bob Ross. You saw this John Singer Sargent painting in a magazine. Other than that, was anyone in your family practicing art at all?
No, my oldest brother dabbled in the arts, and my parents both went to dental school, so I think there's artistic kind of sensibilities that are run in my family. I remember watching my father sculpt a tooth out of a piece of soap just kind of while he was watching TV one time. So I think it definitely existed, but um, no one would ever dare think of becoming a painter as a profession. So it wasn't like they pushed me into it.
Sure. Did you study art in high school? And if so, was the training you received based on drawing and painting from life?
Yeah, so in high school, I did take art classes, just your typical kind of what every kid does. The unique thing I think was that my uh, teacher, towards the end, when I was about to graduate, told me to go check out the university, uh, Minot State University, to take some figure drawing, and she got me permission to go check out the figure drawing, and it was a good experience, but it was a really, really bad experience on the other hand, just because the teacher was so bad that he would have me do silly stuff like draw the leg 2 times as big just to make sure that you're like getting the gesture. So the experience of being, I guess, kind of around the nude figure, it was good, but it wasn't anything that helped me.
Sure. After finishing high school, you applied for several scholarships and were accepted into some prestigious art schools. However, you turned these offers down. Can you explain why?
Yeah, so both of the scholarships that I got were basically kind of had some strings attached to them. And I didn't like the idea of pursuing painting and drawing and having to kind of measure up to these standards. I just wanted to paint and draw. And so it probably wasn't necessarily a bad thing. I just, at that time, for me, being kind of rebellious and not wanting to do any kind of academic stuff, I
Hmm.
didn't want to be judged based off of any kind of grading system. I just wanted to paint and draw. So that's where I ended up rejecting those two offers and pursuing a different path.
Sure. And this is right after finishing high school.
Yeah, during kind of the last year when I was trying to figure out what opportunities were ahead.
Sure, sure. You began doing some research and discovered the Minnesota River School of Fine Art. After a tour, you decided to study at this school, the director of which was Patricia Jerd, a woman who was denied the opportunity to study with Richard Lack. At the age of 19, you began your serious training as a painter in this school. Can you outline the type of training you were exposed to?
Yeah, so the woman's name is Patricia Jurdy, and she was, unfortunately, she just wasn't able to study with Lack due to her situation and lacks criteria for allowing certain students in. So she opened a school. She was able to open a school that she really wanted to kind of like share the knowledge that she felt she missed out on. And she did get further training with one of LAC's students, so she had a pretty vast knowledge of how the system worked. And so basically, when I started, it was everything. I could do figure drawing, I could do still life painting, I could do cast drawing, cast painting, portrait painting. It was all kind of the first year was just whatever I wanted to dabble in. That's what I did.
Sure. So you walk into the Minnesota River School of Fine Art for a tour, and did it just click for you that this is the place I'm looking for?
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. It was based off of a couple of different things, but mainly it was because she was really sweet, and I was coming from a small town. My parents were essentially just dropping me off in Minneapolis. I had never really had any kind of experience living on my own. I lived downtown Minneapolis, and I felt like this was out in the suburbs. It was I could focus, it was safe, etc. So I would do like a reverse commute and drive out to the suburbs, and then I would live in the city.
Sure. Over time, you attended a variety of ateliers, including one other school in Minnesota, and during this time, you met Richard Whitney, one of New Hampshire's most prominent portrait painters and a pupil of the famous Boston school painter R.H. Gamble. I understand you took workshops with him. Can you explain how you first discovered Mr. Whitney and his work?
Yeah, so Richard Whitney was the first kind of living master that I ever came across, and it was a distinct difference in his style of education versus the instructors that I was kind of working with, and partially maybe because he's got he's from the Northeast. He stayed with Gamel. It was just very, very like another level of intensity, and that kind of shook me the first time I experienced it. So I did, yeah, I took a couple classes with him actually through that first school that I mentioned, the Minnesota River School of Fine Art, and
Sure.
yeah, it was pretty incredible.
Can you describe your experience meeting and learning from Mr. Whitney?
Yeah, so just the first time I guess I met him, it wasn't. Um, I was a student and I was super eager, and I remember like the night before, like trying to like envision, like trying to paint the best possible painting I could, etc. I was always trying to like figure out if there was a way that I could somehow um, just impress somebody, I guess. Just try to get like to the next level. And yeah, and his workshop was intense. I had never been critiqued like that. He kind of put me in my place. He definitely humbled me, and it was a yeah life changing experience.
Sure. And at this point, were you aware of R.H.I.'s Gamel and how the lineage of traditional realist painting was kept alive? And did that really resonate with you that, oh wow, that Mr. Whitney is actually a man who is a painter who is part of this particular lineage?
I wasn't fully aware of it, and yeah, it was just it wasn't until I came out to Boston, went through the museums when I was 19, and got to meet Mr. Whitney again at his home, and so it was, uh, you know, that stuff didn't really sink in. I was just kind of going through the motions, I guess, and had opportunities presented to me, and it was all really incredible. But it isn't until I'm older now. I'm 43, and I can look back on it, and it's more special now, I think, than when I was actually experiencing it.
Sure. Do you keep in touch with Mr. Whitney nowadays?
I don't. I want to reach out because we're actually really close to him. I really want to. I really want to reach out, so I have to do that.
Sure. I understand it was Mr. Whitney who introduced you to the work of Dennis Miller Bunker, and you fell in love with the way he depicted just one rose. What was it about Bunker's work that connected with you?
Yeah, so Dennis Miller Bunker is, he was in and around Boston. If you're not familiar with his work, definitely check it out, anyone who's listening. Um, and he was kind of at that moment where it was the academic training that he had got from Jerome and came back to the States and was, exploring and doing stuff and really kind of pushing the boundary as far as like Impressionism and academic art was concerned. And he had such a sensibility and such a subtlety. Again, as a youth, I don't think I fully understood it. It was just very impactful to me because it was, um, we'll get into my studies with Jacob Collins, but Jacob talked about kind of this modern sensibility of lifting up an object to the point of it being art in the viewer's eyes, where it's just this thing of beauty. And Dennis Miller Bunker had that ability to translate what I was used to seeing flowers as into something that was another level, completely multidimensional, beyond a pretty poster or a pretty card or something like that. It was a further understanding of what fine art could be. So,
Sure, sure. Now, following this period, you continued your training at the Atelier Studio Program of Fine Arts in Minneapolis for 1.5 years. How were you introduced to this school and the world of classical realism?
yeah, so the Atelier was Richard Lack's, a few of his students who took over the school after he got too old to run it himself. And I was familiar with, after studying in Burnsville at the Minnesota River School of Fine Art. I was familiar with kind of what was happening in the art world a little bit. Classical realism, the Classical Realism Journal was, around the studio, around the school out in Burnsville. And so I understood that that was kind of the next step. I needed to go study full time. I was full time at the first school, but it was kind of like an introductory program. It wasn't like years of cast work. And so I ended up, after that first year, switching schools. Because I was already living in the city, it was a natural kind of transition to study at the atelier that was there in Minneapolis.
Sure. Can you describe the first time you met Richard Lack?
Yeah, so Richard Lack, I met him before I left Minnesota, and um, we went and visited his house, and he was getting up there in age. He was still healthy, but he was just, you could tell he was getting older, and so a friend and I were in his studio, and we didn't know that Lack was watching us, but we were in his studio and he was down the hall in his bedroom, and he was like, he had the door kind of cracked open. He was watching us. And I remember that was my first experience. We kind of got to meet him a little bit after that, because they were having lunch when we finished up. But yeah, it was really kind of funny because it was like really intense that he was spying on us in the studio.
That's really fascinating, Michael. So just to give a little bit of perspective as to Richard Lack and his reputation at the time, was he known as like the guy to go to for solid academic training when you were young?
Uh, I think at that point, so that was as I was kind of leaving Minnesota, and um, I think my kind of rebellious nature still continued with me until I got a little bit older. So at that time, I was still, I wasn't like, you know, um, being respectful to authority. Yet, I still had that kind of rebellious youth. So I knew he was really important. But as an eager young artist, I definitely wanted to kind of go beyond and just try to figure out things on my own. So there was a sense of respect, but at the same time, it was kind of like there was that trying to kind of buck the system, and so there was kind of disrespect from my end on that as well.
Sure. Whilst training at the Atelier studio program of fine arts, you met some influential artists who opened doors for you, namely Jeffrey Larson and Paul Oxborough. As a younger student, you watched them sell out their exhibitions and become successful. What advice did you gain from Jeffrey and Paul that stuck with you?
Yeah, so Paul was a little bit closer to me than Jeff was at the beginning because Paul gave a lecture at the Atelier, and he ended up coming into my studio and buying one of my paintings because he thought it was really good, and that
Great.
was incredible for me. That was just enough of a kind of encouragement to keep going. And with Jeff, you know, I'd seen both of them sell out shows, but Jeff was, um, it seemed like he was more of a star just because all my teachers would always talk about him in that environment, and Paul Oxborough was a little bit more on the I guess outside of the Atelier bubble. So I really was interested in what he was doing, but he wasn't lifted up as one of the ideal students because he was at that time he was starting to work from photography, and people were kind of like very serious about working from life. So yeah.
Sure. So Jeffrey Larson at the time, was he one of the biggest names in traditional realism?
Definitely for our area. I mean, for the Midwest, he was doing things that, I mean, he still does to this day, but he was doing things that were um, very unique, you know,
Mhm.
very unique in the sense that selling out shows with the gallery or on his own, he was really networking within Minneapolis and finding a lot of important clients.
Sure. That's incredible.
Yeah.
Who were some of the other artists and teachers you met while in Minneapolis?
Yeah. So I have to mention people like Darren Russar, Richard Kochinash, Darren Kingsley. These are all influential people in my life as well, but they were some were teachers and some were friends. So yeah, but just there was a lot of people around the area. Joe Paquette is still in St. Paul. So yeah, there's a lot of talented people in that uh, group.
Sure, sure. Now it's interesting that you mentioned Darren Rosar because he is a leading authority on site size. Did he have much of
Yes,
an influence on you with his site size teaching in your youth?
he definitely was very thorough in his teaching system, and uh, but for me, I was never a big fan or practitioner of site size. It was always uncomfortable for me. So it wasn't like it was the voice I was looking for. It was definitely difficult.
Sure. During your training at the Atelier Studio program of fine arts, you would take time to look through art magazines and you began noticing the work coming out of a studio in New York called the Water Street Atelier, which caught your attention and you realized your own training was not resulting in the outcomes that you were looking at. What was it about the work from Water Street that interested you?
Yeah. So when I saw the article, uh, I think it was in 2001 of the Water Street Atelier, and it kind of again another moment where it kind of transformed everything I was thinking about. I just wanted to go to New York. I felt like everything that I had learned wasn't sufficient and I needed to get more information, something from a living master. And so I knew that Jacob was accepting students, and so that led to my move eventually out to New York.
Sure. And at that time in the Midwest, was Jacob Collins a household name in the world of traditional realism?
No, not for our little situation. It was I think he was becoming popular, kind of on the scene of the magazine scene. His atelier in Brooklyn was, gaining a lot of traction. But as far as Minnesota was concerned, they weren't really interested in him.
Sure. Keen to broaden your understanding of traditional painting even further, you decided to leave Minneapolis after 2.5 years of study to move east to New York City, where you took classes at the Art Students League under the late Nelson Shanks for 2 months. How did you become aware of the Art Students League, and what drove your decision to study with Mr. Shanks?
Yeah, so the Art Students League was one of the opportunities to go and take classes. And so simultaneously, as I was starting with Jacob, I was doing that, and Nelson at the time was giving classes. So of course, I studied with him. Uh, it was nice. It wasn't everything that I was hoping. He's such an incredible person. He was very kind of grand and eloquent, but it wasn't intimate enough of a setting for me to feel like I could get what I needed out of it. So after a little while, I just eventually dropped it.
Hmm. Sure. Now, what was your impression of Mr. Shanks as an artist and teacher?
Yeah, he was very kind. Uh, I met him again at his house later on. Same way. Extremely kind, very confident. Very, he's a brilliant guy. He had his own vision. I was always trying to kind of see through his persona and see if what he was saying was sincere or if he was hiding something. But yeah, I respect him so much. I think he's one of the greatest painters, of our time, and he'll go down in history as that.
Sure, sure, agreed. Now, Michael, if I can ask, what is your opinion of Studio Incaminati, the school, of course, in Philadelphia that's maintaining Mr. Shanks's legacy?
Yeah, from what I've seen, it's unique in the sense that it focuses on color, and
Yes,
Nelson was very adamant about the fact that color was kind of the foundational principle of this new contemporary language that he discovered by blending the kind of baroque and older forms of art and having it be of our time and continuing this incredible way of painting. Now again, for me, um, would I prefer to, if it was possible to sit in Nelson's studio 5 days a week, I definitely would prefer that over in Caminati. I think there's a certain things that you can't teach in a classroom, and so you can only learn so much in that kind of setting versus seeing a masterpiece unfold.
sure. In 2002, you discovered Jacob Collins and began training under him, first at his home in 69th Street and then at his school, which was then titled the Water Street Atelier in New York, which is today known as Grand Central Atelier. At that point, was Jacob and his teaching well known by the realist movement?
Yeah. So yeah, Jake. I mean, the Jacob is, yeah, at the time he was showing and selling out shows at John Pence Gallery on the West Coast. He lived in New York, and the movement was starting. Um, the internet was starting, and everything was kind of just slowly becoming mainstream, I guess. So yeah, Jacob has always been a part of it.
Sure. What was your first impression of Jacob and his manner during your interview? As I understand, at that point, he was quite conservative and would often discourage students from taking on this training.
Yeah, so you know, everyone has a kind of similar experience with Jacob upon meeting him. He's he's very polite. He's very straightforward, but he's also trying to dig out if you have what it takes to actually pursue this, because he doesn't have time to waste on students who are not committed. So he would really push you and kind of almost push you to the point of giving up in the hopes that what he's looking for is someone who's really interested in what it takes, because everyone has a different um, intensity level, and everyone comes from a different background. So he wants to reach the people that he thinks are going to go on and influence the
Sure.
art world.
Right. And at this point, was Jacob, with amongst your peers, amongst your colleagues, was he someone that essentially you all aspired to be like?
Um, yeah, that's a great question. I mean, he, out of all people in my life, I probably was most influenced by Jacob. But I don't know if I fully was aware of like kind of the influence. I just knew that it was a different world in New York City. I was being exposed to things I'd never seen before. He grew up on Park Avenue. It's a world within a world in New York, and um, I definitely like had the most respect for him and his family and the situation that I found myself in.
Sure. And there's that funny little anecdote, Michael, of the first time you met Jacob, where you went to sit down and you sat down on a couch that had no back to it, and you ended up bumping your head. Is that correct?
It's very true. Yeah, yeah. I I totally nailed my head. Yeah.
Well, it's a good little icebreaker. I mean, here you are meeting one of the most important realist painters in the world, and that little
Hmm.
incident happened.
Right. Yeah. He was
One
very nice. He was worried about me being okay, and yeah, it was all good.
one missing aspect which your paintings had at this point was a strong grounding in form, which you quickly identified in the work coming out of Water Street at the time. Can you outline the training you undertook with Jacob during your 3 years of study and how it expanded your understanding of form?
Yeah. So Jacob's different iterations of schools have kind of gone, and they just are different each step of the way. So what I experienced was different than Water Street Atelier, and uh, you know, what I experienced was different than the Grand Central Atelier or Academy or anything that was after as well. So it's always depending on when you study with them. It depends on what you get, because sometimes the students have more influence than other points. So my education was I was with him at his house. There was a group of probably 15 to maybe 20. That would probably be a lot. 15 of us to 20 of us that worked around the figure model with him. And the first year, um, we were kind of off to the side doing casts, but we were still in the same room as everybody. So it was very kind of tight. We got to listen to the conversations, we got to watch them paint. So it was interesting because I had already come from 3 years of education. And so I was trying to wrap my head around this idea of form. And so there was a lot of interesting and new things kind of developing at that point in my education.
Sure, sure. So that sounds like a an ideal setting to be as a young art student who was really eager and hungry to learn academic principles of art. And now, did you were there opportunities where you got to share meals with Jacob and really pick his brain?
Yeah, there was definitely a lot of opportunity to hang out and experience life, and just but I was still fairly young, new to the city, so I definitely wasn't doing a lot of like investigation. I was just kind of watching and learning. I didn't have the experience or intelligence to be able to ask the right questions. I was just kind of trying to absorb everything I could.
Right. I understand you met many artists during your time at Water Street, including Michael Grimaldi, Kate Lemon, and Travis Schlatt, all of which are now household names in the world of contemporary realism. Did you find being surrounded by so many artists distracting? For example, some artists may find it difficult to concentrate with the studio being constantly full.
Yeah, so those artists in particular were not part of the studio environment per se. When I was at Water Street, they were in and around New York. I was friends. I met them all. I would have dinner over at Kate's place, and at the time she was dating Travis, and so I would have great kind of interaction with them on a personal level as people, and kind of you know I looked up to them in so many ways. The studio was definitely being that it was full of really talented people. It was distracting and difficult to concentrate, but it was good.
Sure. And I suppose we all have people that we drift towards and form really close connections with in certain environments. Did you have a good buddy that you really clicked with in your days of Water Street, or were there multiple?
There was a few. I wouldn't say that I was super tight with anybody, but there were some names that no one would really know now because people kind of fall off the
Mm,
the scene. And but so yeah, I had a few friends who are not well known now, but they were really talented. They just pursued other paths.
sure. Michael, would you say the environment that you were exposed to at Water Street essentially was what you had been looking for up until that point?
Yeah, so the what I walked into was different than Water Street Atelier. So what I saw in the magazine when it kind of drew me in was this 19th century kind of North Lit studio in Brooklyn, very dramatic, very intense. And Jacob happened to be transitioning, and he moved to 69th Street, bought a carriage house, and he was renovating it. So my first year with Jacob was super hectic because construction was going on the entire first year above us. So we'd have jackhammers as I was like doing cast work. It was pretty crazy. So it
Mm,
wasn't like as romantic of a scene as Water Street was, but it was still better than anything that I had experienced up to that point.
right. Now, whilst a student at Water Street, Jacob encouraged you to start selling your paintings as he would do with majority of his students. Therefore, you began selling paintings at Paul Toner Gallery and the Art Students Showcase in Chelsea, which ranged between $200 and $300 each, and you were able to pay your rent through this process. Can you explain your experience of first selling your works and whether it made you feel acknowledged and respected as a painter?
Yeah, I've told this before, but that was a learning experience for me just because um, up to that point, it was my my wife was my girlfriend at the time, and she was really helping out too with like paying rent, and so it was just a good experience for me to be able to kind of take over that role. And even if there are several $300 paintings, it was still a really good feeling to be paying the rent through art sales. And so that kind of just, I guess, there was other things that happened that were much kind of bigger boosters of my confidence. um, in particular, I had a pretty large sale um, that actually it was to a lawyer in California. It was a sale of a painting that I had done at Jacob's house of an interior,
Mm,
and uh, it sold for $10,000 at the time. I didn't have
wow.
any gallery representation, and it actually paid for a wedding. So like that was that was a bigger booster, I guess, for me. That felt really substantial. But the little sales are also just as important, truly.
Sure, sure. Well, that's interesting. Having sold that painting to that particular lawyer for that price,
Yeah,
that
yeah,
would have been a
yeah.
real confidence boost for you.
Sure, absolutely.
While studying in New York, there came times when selling paintings just wasn't enough to pay rent and earn a living. Therefore, you began waiting tables. Can you recall more about this period of your life, and if, at this point, you began to realize the difficulties of the artist's life?
Yeah, so the waiting tables thing was actually an interesting kind of uh, overlap with. So my wife was a bartender, and I was selling paintings, but it just still wasn't. It didn't feel. Things were still kind of just tight, and I felt like I should do something. Like I should just I should get a job, and so I had always had a fear of serving tables for some reason. It was something. I was a very anxious kid growing up, and it was always like this kind of psychological block to do that. So I just thought it would be something that would be good to try to break that.
Mm,
And so I did. And it was more about like pushing myself to do the thing that I was afraid to do because I just didn't like talking to strangers and particularly waiting on them.
sure.
And so that was just kind of more of a character kind of forming thing because my wife was so good at it that I felt like I had to understand what she did all the time.
Mm,
And so while I was selling those paintings that were a couple $100, I was also trying to do some other work on the side.
sure. During your time training at Water Street, you met your future wife, Nelida, who had studied culinary arts in her hometown of Buenos Aires, Argentina. Can you explain how you first met and how your relationship unfolded?
I lived on 82nd Street, right in like kind of close by the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and she happened to be working as a bartender on that same street, and so I ended up meeting her one night when she was working, and yeah, I mean, I could go on forever about that, but we've been married almost 20 years, and it was a real life changing moment for me.
That's fascinating, Michael. And it's interesting how you connected because you're essentially from two different parts of the world. Was that a barrier at all? Or is that something that drew you closer together?
Yeah, it was definitely like so the over my life, I've realized that um, things are not as they appear, right? So um, you can't make assumptions about people. You can't because every situation is unique. But coming from a small town, I didn't know that. So I was always trying to figure people out, and I made a lot of mistakes. And I remember when my wife at that first meeting, when I met her at the bar, she asked me where I was from, and to this day, she still remembers me being kind of embarrassed about saying I was from North Dakota. But she's from Buenos Aires. She didn't have a clue anything outside of New York. I mean,
Mm,
she didn't know, where North Dakota was. So it's those kind of things that like you just the world is so big and you just can't get inside the other person's mind. You don't know what someone else is thinking.
sure, right. And are you and Nalita about the same age, Michael?
No, my wife's older than me.
Sure, sure. Now, the first time you met Nalita's parents was quite special. I understand you gave them a portrait which you had previously painted of Nalita. Is that correct?
I did. Yeah, it was a very special meeting.
Lovely. And what was their reaction?
Well, I had written. My brother did a translation for me, so I had written a letter to them uh, because we were married by the time I met them. So I was going to meet my in-laws for the first time,
Hmm.
and so I wrote a really beautiful letter, and it was a very emotional kind of meeting because I was meeting my family literally on my wife's side for the first time ever. So the portrait was just the extra thing. The letter was really the thing that was the emotional part.
Sure. That sounds beautiful, Michael. After finishing your training at Water Street in 2005, you were eager to start painting on your own and you began working on a series of 10 paintings from your one bedroom apartment located in Inwood Heights in North Manhattan. I understand you converted the lounge into your studio and were painting eagerly with the intention of being signed to two galleries in Soho that were known to support realist artists, Arcadia Contemporary or Eleanor Ettinger. One day, you were on the train and you had your paintings under your arm to get them photographed when it occurred to you that you should just take the paintings to Arcadia rather than sending photos. So you made your way to the gallery. What happened when you arrived?
Yeah, so that I can just quickly, say that that's just kind of representative of like, how my life has been. I don't plan things. I do things on a whim. Most people would think it's crazy. But for me, it just made more sense. I was like, I'm taking these big original paintings. They were like, some of them were like probably 40 inches wide. Um, and I was taking them to be photographed down to like a 4 by 5 transparency to show the gallery. And that didn't make sense to me. And
Mm,
so uh, they were hanging a show. I didn't know it, but they were hanging a show. So all the work was down and they were busy in the gallery. So I just knocked on the door and they were like, "Oh, we're not open, but come in." And I showed the owner, Stephen Dimont, my work, and yeah, he was just like, "I'll take them." I mean, it was really weird because it was like nobody does that. So
sure.
he thought they were really awesome, and he was early. It was early in his. He had been in the business a long time, so he had a sense of what he could do with them, and so yeah. But I just it was all new for me. I didn't know what I was doing. I would probably never do it again if I knew what I was doing. But I was kind of innocent and did things how I thought how I felt.
Sure, sure. So from that moment when you actually walked up to Arcadia's front door and you were you essentially signed from that point on?
Yeah, I mean, we worked together for up till about 2013 when they transitioned into a more contemporary uh, kind of voice, I guess, or brand. And yeah, so I did several shows with them and worked with them for many years.
That's an incredible story. Selling 6 out of the 7 paintings at the trade show in Boston must have been very encouraging. What are your memories of this breakthrough?
Yeah, so that was definitely like a totally different experience because at the time I was working and trying to sell those little paintings, and to me that was the biggest thing that had happened in my life. That was I knew that I didn't I knew that the contemporary art world was big, and I didn't particularly care much about the art world. I just cared about Arcadia and what was happening in Soho between them and Eleanor Ettinger, as you mentioned. So for me, it was like, yeah, that was the pinnacle. And there's still just such an incredible gallery that it was a big deal and still would be for anybody.
Sure. Now, the money from that first show enabled you to leave your job as a waiter. Did you feel that you were becoming better known in the realist world of New York at that point? And was the thrill of selling your works causing you to become complacent, or were you still hungry?
Yeah, so no, I was still super ambitious, definitely not complacent at all. I knew I had a long way to go, and it was really nice, but like basically, it was kind of like my vision was for exhibitions.
Mm,
So I definitely was. Yeah, I hadn't had a solo show, so I was still very hungry. Yeah, I was eager to make a mark. I don't think people knew who I was, so it was just the start.
right, right. Once you were represented by Arcadia, did this give you a sense of security?
Not it was security is definitely not the right word. It gave me hope. Um, it gave me hope in a really encouraging way. So, but not security.
Mm. In 2005, you first traveled to Nelita's hometown in the province of Buenos Aires, a town called Merlo, just after you were married. I understand it was the first time you had been outside of the US for an extended period. Whilst there, you became accustomed to Nalita's culture and experienced first-hand poverty in a third world country, which impacted on your life view. How do you feel your views changed after experiencing Buenos Aires for the first time?
Yeah. So, for me, it was kind of the experience of when I first moved to New York, um, all over again, where I had, I was in a place where they were speaking another language. Everything was different. I really liked driving from the airport to her house. We had a taxi taking us, and it was the first time I'd been in a third world country where it was really rough, and even more rough than New York, and I could I could see it, I could feel it, and it was definitely a new experience. But at the same time, it was beautiful because Buenos Aires is just really beautiful, and so there was like other things that were really fascinating to me. So it was a mix of emotions.
Sure. I understand you were particularly impacted by how organic things felt in Buenos Aires, and you became more sensitive towards the color harmonies found in nature, as you state, quote, "In Argentina, I experienced color harmonies that arose from things changing, peeling paint, exposing mortar and brick. I felt as if I had taken a step back in time. There was an air of natural beauty that I was experiencing, not just in my surrounding, but also in the lifestyle of my wife's family. I began to see the beauty in a fence constructed of objects that people found, or a chain link fence drooping in parts with flowers and shrubbery growing up and around it. I fell in love with the story of my wife's family. I fell in love with their personal objects, their history, and the way they lived." Unquote. Your time in Buenos Aires sounds very idyllic and romantic, the perfect place for an art student to be immersed in right after finishing their training. Being an American, how did you find you fit in with Nalita's family, and what was their opinion of you being a painter?
Yeah. So as you were reading that, like, I got kind of emotional just because it was the first time in my life that I had experienced um, a really intimate connection with the world around me. It was just different. I was so used to shopping malls and the city that I didn't have a connection, even though I grew up close to a farm. In the Midwest, I was exposed. I loved nature. I studied nature as a kid. I was fascinated by sunsets and whatnot, but not in a similar way as when I was down there. Everything started to kind of click for me because I had 7 years of training, and then I was plopped in this kind of literally another world. It was like uh, it was an incredible moment for me because I had big dreams, and I was meeting my wife's family, new experiences around me. It was extremely uh, pivotal and emotional.
Sure. Your love for Buenos Aires and its aesthetics got to the point where you and Nelida decided to move there for good. So you took a leap of faith in 2006 and moved there permanently from New York. Your justification for moving was that the cost of living would be cheaper for you in the long run, and it would inspire you to paint new things as you were in a new space, which would prepare you for your first solo show in New York. You also felt that you needed more of an authentic experience of what it's like to make art in such a context, which couldn't be achieved while just on vacation. Can you explain what it was like moving to Argentina and adapting to the environment, especially when coming from busy New York City?
Yeah, so when my wife and I went for that first vacation, I actually there was a property that was for sale, and I would wake up every morning and go down there and look at it, and it's one of those things. Is like a dreamer, as someone who um, comes from a small town, moved to the city, and I started thinking that it would be much more viable to paint in this location because it was so much, everything was so much cheaper. And I needed to be able to focus on art. I didn't have the resources to be able to do it in New York, and so that just it started like that first trip, and so then we kind of thought about it, went back to New York. See, we were wondering if it'd be possible, and some things kind of opened up, and we eventually moved down there, and it was really meant to be because my life wouldn't be what it is today if I didn't have that experience.
Sure. Once settled, you built a studio in Buenos Aires that was based on the lighting setup of the 19th century ateliers, which was most favorable for still life and portrait painting and opens directly to the garden. Can you explain more about this studio and how you went about designing and constructing it?
Yeah, so I've talked at length just throughout my career about my studio in Buenos Aires, and it was in Merlo, which is a province of the city. It was kind of like a suburb, but kind of run down and much poorer than American suburbs. Um, but yeah, so we bought the property. We moved everything we had down there. My father-in-law actually helped build the studio for me, so I didn't speak Spanish at the time, and so I made a little maquette out of cardboard to show him how I needed things to be, the positioning of the lights, and they thought I was crazy because they didn't know what was going on because no one created lights like this. That no one. So what I did was basically it was a box, but the lights were like they kind of like lifted out of the ceiling. So the windows lifted out of the ceiling another like meter and a half, and they were positioned in a really awkward way, which they were facing perfectly south. And so in the southern hemisphere, you need southern exposure. And so, so I would put this box that I made out of cardboard with the windows on the floor, and I would position it perfectly where the building was going to sit, and I'd put my eye in there, and I'd watch the sun go by to make sure that it was because it would happen the exact same on this little scale as it would on the big scale.
Hmm.
And so when I knew that it was going to work, then I told them to pour the roof. And so they did a cement roof because that's how they thought maybe I would build higher, a second story. A lot of the construction was different and stuff. So I knew I had one shot at this. So there was basically like a cement uh, floor on top of this big box that had two holes in it. And then once that all dried, they had all the rebar and all the infrastructure so that it was a floor. And then once that all dried, then they took the wood off like I don't know if it was a month later because the wood support holds it
Hmm.
up. And so I got to walk in for the first time and kind of like they built the sides. Um, the windows hadn't gone on yet, but they built the sides where the windows would be. And so they took off the wood, and I got to walk into this like really kind of rough looking studio, and it was incredible. It was like I just knew that I was on the right track. So
That's fascinating. And how long did
yeah.
the entire process of building the studio take?
It was the whole time I was down there, I kept fiddling with it. So I kept kind of manipulating and adding to it and breaking out sections. So I added new windows, I built an extension. And so it was fun because the building codes, they're basically, they didn't exist down there. They did, but it was like no one checked anything. And
Sure.
so I was just building whatever I wanted. And so I could make it completely custom. And so yeah, it was probably the ugliest building, but the best.
Sure. Now, whilst in Argentina, you would often be on your own as Nalita would be away and you would find yourself needing to ask for things from your family. You always had models who were willing to pose, as I understand Nalita has a large family. Unable to speak Spanish at the time, you began to learn how to communicate and eventually became proficient in speaking the language. Whilst in Buenos Aires, I understand you are sometimes perceived as the rich American. Do you feel like an out of towner whilst there, or does it feel like a home away from home for you?
Yeah, so there's a lot there. So yeah, my family who took care of me. You know, they would check in on me while my wife was gone because she wasn't an American citizen yet, so she had to go back to the States. She couldn't be out of the country for too long. So I just kept working and painting, and so I painted my family members, and and I was learning as I was going, and just it was a fascinating time because I'm learning a new language. I'm painting for a show. I'm away from my wife, but I'm with her family, and so after a while, yes, people started to kind of perceive me as the rich American, even though that wasn't the case. It was definitely, like, they just didn't understand the fact that my paintings were really valuable. It wasn't that I was selling, paintings every day. It was I was preparing for a show, so it wasn't like I had money in the bank, but it was not like I wasn't a wealthy person by any standard. But then,
Sure.
so as far as if I felt like it was home for me, or when I'm down there, does it feel like home? And yes and no. Um, it's different, but it's a home away from home, I guess is a good way to describe it.
Sure, sure. And I understand, Michael, it did take your family a little bit of time to come to terms with what it is that you actually do, because I've heard you say on other occasions that you would, when they would see you go into the studio and spend 8 hours, staring at a series of plums and a still life arrangement, that was a bit, a bit of a foreign thing for them. So how did that all play out? Did it take him a little bit of time to come to understand what it is that you do as a painter?
Yeah, definitely. They thought I was out of my mind, just for many, many reasons. Crazy accent, crazy ideas, just like crazy job. So it was definitely like I remember just an example. The woman who brought us our rose bushes to plant in our garden. My wife was like, at the time she was with me, and she was like, my husband, paints these. And she was like, I don't understand. And she was
Mm,
like, well, he makes a picture. And so she went and got it and came and showed her. And she was like, you can sell that. She had no clue that there would be any kind of demand for her. The plant, which was like, probably not even a couple dollars American, that had way more value than like a painting that was like
mm,
$5,000. You know what I mean?
sure.
Like it just didn't make sense for anybody down there.
That's fascinating. As we have discussed, Buenos Aires has had a profound impact on your vision and has enriched your appreciation for the natural world and gardens in particular. You were noted in saying, quote, Argentina's incredibly rich soil produces gorgeous and diverse flowers, unquote. I understand that isolating yourself in Buenos Aires provided you with the time you needed to develop your vision and figure out what it is that really moved you to paint. It is then that you began to create the paintings that you are best known for. Still lives, inspired by the natural environment, particularly florals, interior and exterior figure paintings of your relatives that are imbued with a timeless, traditional Argentinian quality that harkens back to the painters of the 19th century, such as William Bouguereau and Bastien Lepage. Observing these paintings, one can genuinely feel the magic that you experienced in Buenos Aires at the time, and understand that they continue to inspire artists to this day. Do you feel as though this early series of paintings created in Buenos Aires defines your artistic sensibility? And is it a challenge to top these paintings nowadays?
Yeah. So it definitely was, it was from even like looking back on it now and seeing what a lot of people have done in the art world, even so many years later, it was really, really unique. It was unique because I was devoting so much time to painting from life, and I had the perfect situation for it. I had models all around me. I had the ideal kind of studio. I was preparing for what in my mind would have been like, the Paris Salon. It was my first show in New York, and so yeah, it was unique on many levels, and I've had a difficult time recreating it only because when when you're given a task, I guess, and you're kind of innocently pursuing it, um, you know, my idealism at the time and kind of being ignorant to what I actually would unfold really allowed me to just kind of live in the moment and be completely absorbed by painting. And no other, like, it's happened very rarely in my life since then. That was at such an intense level. And so, yeah, it was definitely unique.
Sure. And there is something very magical about those paintings that you created, and yeah, I'm not the only one that identifies that. I'm sure many of your colleagues have approached you and spoken of the sincerity and authenticity that you captured in those particular paintings. It almost felt like you were like a South American boogero or something like that. Michael, it's generally something very touching, and definitely some of the finest contemporary realist paintings that I've ever seen.
Thank you.
I understand this idea of truth behind beauty is something you began to question while working in Buenos Aires, as in New York you were feeling perplexed due to the lack of appreciation for realist painting at the time. In hindsight, do you think that your time in Buenos Aires was essentially about retreating into yourself and trying to find yourself after being surrounded by cynicism in the art world back in New York?
So yeah, that's a kind of a difficult question to address just because the environment that I was in New York was very interesting. It was cool. It was, there was a lot of stuff happening, a lot of inspiring stuff. Not it was not all cynical, but at the same time, there was some realism to it, and the fact that, like, as you know, if you've ever been to New York, it's a difficult city to like thrive in, and so the idea of like truth and beauty is not something I don't think that many New Yorkers like would associate their day-to-day life with. So um, being in Buenos Aires kind of shocked me out of what I was in for the last, 4, I would say 4 years. It was from 2002 to 2006. So it was, yeah, uh, it just completely flipped everything on its head.
Sure. And I know a lot of your colleagues, Michael, are quite envious of the way you went about it. I mean, you finished your training and you were able to just leave New York and isolate yourself in Buenos Aires. And for a lot of your colleagues, I mean, they weren't able to actually do that because they felt like they needed to be surrounded by this sense of community, and that idea of community was very important to them. But you being from Minot in North Dakota, having grown up in a small town, that was something that was a lot easier for you to do, to my understanding. Is that correct?
Kind of. So um, the sense of community in New York kind of came later, and we can get into that. But when I left, leaving Jacob's school, I think there was still a sense of like everyone was kind of independently pursuing, like Michael Grimaldi, for example, he was pursuing his career definitely independently, and so it was unique what I did, but at the same time, everyone was kind of like getting their education and going and saying something, going
Mm,
and doing something.
mm.
So I was kind of following in the footsteps of like people like Michael Grimaldi and Dan Thompson and Kate Lehman. It was like everyone was kind of leaving the nest and going and being different. So I was just kind of following in the footsteps of those artists.
Right. After having your first solo show in New York in 2008, you were inspired by a film based on the Spanish artist Antonio Lopez Garcia and his efforts in painting a quince tree in his backyard. The film is called Dream of Light. You took some money you had made from your exhibition and invested in video production equipment. With the help of your wife, you filmed the flower painting DVD, which came to be the first instructional documentary about painting. Can you recall your memories of recording this video and why you decided to embark on this project?
Yeah, so I mean, I could go on for a long time about this, but so I grew up playing with a lot of video cameras. So I was
Mm,
always kind of filming us skateboarding and
yes,
making videos of us skateboarding. And
right.
so for me, watching Antonio Lopez Garcia create a painting in his studio, it really was powerful because all I all, I was just thinking about uh, like if we could have watched the old masters paint,
Mm,
that was what was going through my mind. If we could watch Bouguereau, if we could watch these artists that Daniel Bouveret or Phantom Latour
mm,
or anybody that I really loved, Lepage, and so for me, I was just like, I want to pursue this so that it can open the doors for other people. And this is like pre YouTube
mm.
basically.
Right, right. After living in Argentina for 4 years and with the growing need to feel part of an artist community, you returned back to New York in 2010. It is precisely at this time that you began to discover your spirituality and belief that God exists. Inspired by the positive, patient, and loving character of your father in law, who experienced the loss of his parents at a young age and became a Christian when he was 20 years old, he would often speak about the life of Jesus Christ and was adamant that in life there was always something better to come. You began speaking to Nalida and discussing that reconnecting with your faith and attending church is perhaps something you should start to do. This eventuated to becoming a Christian in 2010. In time, your perspective began to change and you began seeing the challenges you were facing in new light. As you state, quote, there was a time in my life when I questioned everything and wondered why I was painting at all. But I found meaning through my faith, and it has taken a lot of the pressure off. It's not all about me. I don't care as much if something sells, if something doesn't. If I'm asked to join a gallery, if I'm asked to leave a gallery, it doesn't go as deep because I'm no longer defined only by my art. Of course, there are still challenging moments and circumstances, but I feel I now have the tools and ability to deal with them better than I once did. Unquote. It seems like this was a special time in your life and you had a tremendous sense of clarity and peace of mind. Can you explain more about this period and the process of becoming a Christian and how it impacted your life and work?
Yeah, so I spent 4 years down in Argentina, and um, my father-in-law is a person of faith. He was of a kind of evangelical kind of environment in Argentina that he was very, very devout. I viewed him as being extremely religious and actually in my kind of still my American kind of ignorance, I didn't really know what to think of someone who actually spoke of Christ in such a sincere way. It was the first time that I'd ever been encountered with someone who really believed the things he believed. So for me, there was that going on alongside the fact that I was experiencing all these amazing moments, like, around me, my wife, the garden, this idyllic kind of setting, and but still very much kind of my life was uh, it was hectic, to say the least. So um, it made a big impression on me that he would always be very patient with me and very kind and loving, and he was always very positive, and kind of I was a tormented artist, um, and so that kind of sat in the back of my head. And when we got back to New York, it was just one of those things where it just kind of happened that I was, you know, approaching 30 years old, and I had been married for a while, and my wife and I just were at a point in our life where we just kind of felt like we needed to maybe kind of get a check on ourselves, maybe we should step foot in a church. And so for me, that had a very profound impact on my life because I came to faith and I wasn't expecting it. So um, it was a beautiful kind of experience because I never would have ever planned it or expected it.
Sure. That's fascinating. Now, I understand your father was raised as a Catholic, however, he never wanted his kids to be raised as he was. He was proud to be secular, and this influenced you. However, your grandparents were religious. Did seeing the faith that your grandparents had influence you in any way to become more religious, or was it just through the example of your father in law?
Yeah, so yeah, definitely. I grew up with that kind of sense that like um, my grandparents were really special, and they lived into their 90s and they were devout Catholics and they were really an extremely good role model for us. And so I definitely had that kind of that like um, you should behave in life kind of background.
Hmm.
But that was it. There was nothing beyond that. I didn't ask any questions. My father, as you mentioned, he was educated. He went to, he's retired now, but he was a doctor, a dentist. And so he definitely did not want us to grow up how he grew up. And so I had kind of the two different options. You could, you could follow in the footsteps of your grandparents, or you could just do whatever you wanted. And I chose to do whatever I wanted.
Hmm. Sure. So in 2010, you came to the faith. What did your study of theology involve at this point?
Yeah, so my exposure to Christianity was in a Spanish church in the Bronx. So very, very weird kind of like for an American to come to faith in that kind of environment, particularly after I had two shows in New York City. So I was like, I already kind of had a little bit of an ego and I remember very vividly saying to my wife that like the second they say something that I don't like, I'm out of here. And
Hmm.
so like I was willing to step into the situation, but I had no clue what was going to happen. And long story short, it changed my life. But I had never, apart from my father-in-law, I had never heard anyone talk about Christ,
Hmm.
basically. And there was a group of people that were from all over the world, Latin America particularly, but there was many countries represented in our church, and these people really believed in what they were kind of practicing, and it was interesting for me because um, it wasn't just like be a good person and move on. It was like they were talking and acting as if this person of Jesus like was actually somebody that was a big part of their life. And so that was all very fascinating for me. And I had millions of questions, and it took me a long time to even open up to the idea of being a person of faith and becoming a Christian. But yeah, I love to talk about it, and I'm happy to talk about it in other places. But yeah, it's a complex and a unique set of circumstances that led me to who I am today.
Right. I understand coming to the faith was life changing and caused you to become more gracious. It really helped you understand that your painting was worthy and that beauty is real. Painting was no longer the only thing that mattered, as there was something which was now more important in your life. Did you find at this point that you lost interest in painting as it was no longer the center of your existence?
It was it was complicated. There was a lot of things going on because like the way I can describe it for people is for me nature was the pinnacle of my existence. So if you think about Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, the Renaissance, anything that leading to academic art, nature was still above all of that. So nature with like a capital N. It was the thing that was the the guiding light in my life. And then when I realized that maybe nature was designed by someone else, it was like this, another level. It was just like rather than just seeing the flower, I saw the creator of the flower. So it opened up a kind of a Pandora's box, literally, of like all these different thoughts and opinions, and so it was, yeah, it was. I don't know if I answered the question, but
Sure.
it transformed my life. Yeah.
That's lovely the way that you explained how you started to see the not just the flower but the creator of the flower.
Yeah.
Now it's been 13 years since you came to the faith, Michael. How would you explain your faith nowadays?
Yeah. So, like anything, um, you have different levels of understanding. You have different kind of intensity levels and all these things. So, I would say that it's absolutely essential for me as a
Hmm.
person. It completely grounds my perspective of the existence of the cosmos and my relationship with Christ. But I'm totally chill about it now. I'm like much more calm. And at the beginning, it was it was because everything changed. It was like the only thing I could think about. Now, because I've thought about it for so long, it's kind of just a part of me. It's like it's I can't take it out of me. It's just who I am.
Sure. Do you attend church every Sunday, Michael?
I don't, because I've moved around so much. It's difficult to find a community that it's for me. It's been I just it I don't think um, and that's where the theology comes in. It's what do we believe in? What do we do? All those things that everyone carries that out in a different way in their life. And for me, the most important and the most essential is just what you believe. And so I haven't been to church for a while. I visit churches, but I'm not like a every Sunday kind of churchgoer.
Sure, sure. So daily prayer, is that something that you engage with in your own time?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Sure. Moving forward, in the past you have described representational painting as follows. Quote, I believe that a form of exceptional representational painting is closer to science because you have a fixed truth which is the external world around us. Making art is a series of personal decisions based on that true source, which is a natural world. We can refer to it as natural law because it doesn't change. The law of gravity is the same now as it was before it was discovered. From the beginning of time, the gravitational pulls of different parts of the universe have existed. Unquote. I agree with this statement and that all great art is based around the fixed truth of the natural world. I would add that through the vision of an enlightened soul, great art then manifests. Nature provides us with the fodder to create masterful artworks. One just has to be open to her beauty and not let ego or pride get in the way. It was best said by Rembrandt, quote, choose only one master, nature, unquote. When we delve deeper and try to seek the truth behind the beauty of nature, we inevitably come to a crossroads. Looking in one direction, we see the path that leads to the Big Bang, which suggests that the universe was created from a violent burst. Looking in the other direction, we see the path that leads to God and a story from the book of Genesis, which explains that He made the world in 7 days. For realists who are believers, this provides validation that their work is enough, as they are essentially glorifying God through every work that they make, without even having to depict religious motives in their work. Considering the New York realists, which are part of your circle, some are faith based artists who are content that God exists, some of which were raised with faith, and others that found faith through their work eventually. What is your opinion on the amount of faith based painters working today?
So my opinion is not probably, you know, I don't think it really matters what I think. I think a lot of people probably have some sort of uh, experience or worldview that they don't, allow the public access to. So I think people are just trying to make really, really impactful work, and I think it's good for our culture and society, that people are returning to kind of a language of painting that is inspired by human experience. And so, whether or not they're faith-based, I don't know, and I'm not super concerned with. So, you know, those are mysteries that will remain probably mysteries, just because not everyone is open with their beliefs.
Sure, sure. And it's something I see a lot throughout the body of work of a lot of fine painters is that if they are of faith, there will be a particular part of their of Ra that's based on their sacred work, essentially. However, Michael, in your body of work, even though you've come to the faith, I don't see, well, I've never actually seen any kind of faith-based typical work in your body of work. Have you ever considered making Christ paintings or any of that sort?
Yeah, so yeah, that goes along with just kind of my personal view. I've done a little bit. I've done some allegorical work, particularly, and um, no real depictions of Christ that are of note. I did some tiny paintings in studies when I was kind of younger, but yeah, I just I feel like I have a better you know voice if I just stick to kind of a general way of viewing the world and not be so specific.
Sure. I see a lot of fascinating work, religious-based work coming from Utah, Michael, and there's some amazing artists who are coming out of Utah. I'm thinking of Ryan Brown, Joseph Bricky, Nikki Covington, so on and so forth.
Hmm.
Have you had much contact with the Utah realist scene at all?
A little bit. Back in the day, I went and visited Jeff Hine and you know Camille Corey, but not as far as like that was just other stuff.
Hmm.
It wasn't related to anything in particular. It was for the video magazine, actually,
Sure.
the production company. Yeah.
Sure, sure. To this day, I understand you enjoy the balance of dividing your time between New York and Buenos Aires. Can you describe how this shift in cultural dynamic impacts your work?
Yeah, I've in 2012 was my last real kind of effort to try to make a show that was based exclusively from Argentina, and it was scheduled for 2014. Collins Galleries ended up taking the work. Is That's when I parted ways with Arcadia, and so I haven't done like a full body of work since then
Hmm,
from Argentina. So.
sure. Now, moving forward, after returning to New York in 2010, you began to feel the need to collaborate with other realist painters after being in isolation for 4 years. Your aim was to promote their work and document the renewal of traditional representational art. With the leader's assistance, this eventuated into founding the first video magazine for realist painters called American Painting Video Magazine, APVM. The videos include interviews and demonstrations with some of the world's most accomplished traditional realist painters. I understand the magazine was a large success and it was downloaded in more than 30 countries in the first month, which led to more content being recorded. Today, the magazine has been viewed by artists, students, and connoisseurs in over 130 countries, which evidences the growing interest in traditional realist art. What inspired you to want to begin a PVM, and can you describe how you went about setting it up and getting it on its feet?
Yeah, so it's funny listening to you say that. Um, there was probably a point in my life that was I should have decided whether I was going to be a painter or I was going to be a producer.
Mm,
And this was again still kind of almost like pre-YouTube. So if I would have understood kind of the impact that it had on people, and the what was coming down the pike, I probably should have just pressed into it and maybe pursued it full time, but it was kind of like a side gig that I was doing with my family, my brothers actually, and my wife, and so it was kind of for fun. I was trying to tell a story of what was happening in the art world, um, and people loved it. But I was in a rhythm that was pretty intense. It was I would travel for a month, I would edit for a month, and then I would paint for a month, and then I'd do it over again.
Wow.
So I would travel for a month, I would paint or edit for a month, and I'd paint for a month. And so it was kind of hectic, but um, yeah, it was, again, like seeing now that people make a viable like living from YouTube essentially, and that kind of thing, like other companies, which we'll get into, like the idea of platforms and influence and all this stuff. I probably should have just stuck to it, but I'm very happy with how my life has ended up. But yeah, as an entrepreneur, sometimes you get ideas that you don't realize how special they are.
Sure, sure. So that's fascinating, Michael, your routine where you were traveling for a month and then filming for a month and painting for a month. Did the editing process all fall on your shoulders, or was it something you could share with Nalida and your brothers?
Oh no, it was all me. Yeah, it was all everything was edited by me.
Wow, that's an incredible workload.
It was a lot. Yeah.
Sure. And at what point did you make the decision as to, uh, putting it online and making it a subscription-based platform? Was that from the get-go? Did you want to do? Was that the intention, or did you want to just do it for love, or how did that all play out?
Oh, it was a mixed. It was mixed emotions, and it was definitely. It was like I wanted to do it to share, but I also wanted to make money from it. So, um, we partnered with Fine Art Connoisseur for a while, and Eric Rhodes was like part of it for a brief period, but then I ended up. It was just that didn't work, and so I kept it going. And business is complicated, and it's never probably easy for anybody, but um, it was a mixed bag of emotions for me.
Sure. Now, Michael, why did you decide to cease recording in 2012?
Yeah, so I basically just kind of let it exist. I didn't make a strong decision to stop doing it. I decided to kind of take a break, and um, and it ended up ending after that. After I took that break, because the edit and kind of travel schedule was so much that after 3 years, 3 seasons of it or whatever, it was. I just had to take a break, and then I just didn't pick it up again.
Sure. I believe that you being the host of the interviews and meeting the artists, that really gave you a great deal of exposure. Would you agree with that?
Maybe, yeah. Again, it was kind of like pre-YouTube, so it's essentially building a platform where I'm connecting with well-known artists, and so yeah, it definitely put me in the limelight, I guess, and kind of put the art that I liked in focus.
Sure. I used to love when you would offer one free episode on the on your website, Michael. I record myself just jumping onto that and watching it, just being glued to the computer screen. That was
I
always
love it.
very much appreciated. Yeah. One of the artists who you interviewed for APVM was Antonio Lopez Garcia. The interview was carried out in Madrid and was in Spanish. How did you manage to get Antonio to agree to the interview? Now, I understand that Amaya Gurpide was involved with that. Is that correct, Michael?
Yeah, so it was a combination of Amaya's friendship with him, and then also he thought it was very interesting that an American who spoke Spanish wanted to fly over and bring their equipment to film him. So he accepted the offer just because he thought that all those things was like a unique scenario.
Hmm. That's incredible. So you you actually flew to Madrid, especially just to interview Mr. Garcia.
Yeah, yeah.
That's incredible. What dedication. Watching that interview as well, Michael, you can see your eagerness to ask questions, of course, but also the intensity of Antonio Lopez Garcia is incredible. He has these piercing eyes that when he's talking about his work or art in particular, he just lights up. He just comes to life. Did you pick up on that through your time interviewing him?
Yeah, he's just an iconic figure. He will go down in history as one of the greats, and it was a real honor to get to be in his presence. I was very humbled by him.
Sure. Also, in 2012, you traveled to Beijing for the American Chinese All Painting Artists League, along with other prominent American realist artists. What were your observations of how traditional realism is being kept alive in China?
Yeah, China, I mean, China has changed quite a bit. It's constantly changing like anything. But well, yeah, at the time, I mean, I just haven't kept up with what's going on. But the Chinese realists were getting uh, really, really high auction prices.
Hmm.
And so the vision of the two kind of countries coming together was that Chinese could benefit from the Americans and the Americans could benefit from the Chinese. And it didn't exactly play out that way because the Chinese had such a big market that they didn't, when they came over to the States, it wasn't, we didn't have the ability to kind of cater to them how they were used to being catered to.
Hmm.
And so, and then the Chinese the collectors started buying Russian art
Yes.
instead of American art. So that's where it all kind of fizzled. But um, yeah, so that was my experience with that.
Sure, sure. Well, many of the Chinese were trained in Russia and they brought that back and then they were able to pass that tradition on through some of their academies in China. Correct, Michael?
Yes, that's
Sure.
correct.
Michael Gormley, former editor of American Artist magazine, stated the following in an article featuring 11 artists of 2011. Quote, Klein is wrestling with his motives for making art. His overarching aim, however, remains steadfast to continue developing an expressive painting form that captures and communicates the things he sees and experiences in life that seem beyond the descriptive range of verbal language. His work seeks to elicit in the viewer the same primal pre-linguistic sensation that accompanies exposure to life's often overlooked numerous occurrences. This approach to realism implies an unspoken covenant with viewers. Klein's painting technique offers an expressive visual language that communicates a sensual vision of the world. It is a worldview that is intuitively and immediately recognizable because it can be both seen and felt, yet the expressive quality of his work communicated by a deft nature truthfully. Hence, the feelings Klein aims to elicit in his viewer are arrived at by subtle means, a gentle invitation rather than a full-on expressive assault. It is if Klein is just pointing the way to what is already there, but is so often missed. It is a view that is hopelessly tangled up in all things human, emotion, memory, and striving, and thus offers a compelling contrast to some realist painting that does little more than mimic photographic effects, unquote. Mr. Gormley's quote eloquently captures the essence of your practice. Your paintings evoke peace and tranquility while whispering a narrative that is never obvious. Your mission seems to be to transcend the truth behind the beauty of your subject. As such, your backgrounds tend to be dark so that the color harmonies of the flowers dominate the composition, or as you have stated, quote, I want the color of the flowers to be the focal point. I want to make it less pretty, so I typically use a somber background, unquote. The lighting in your painting seems to be that of which one encounters on an overcast day. Consequently, this has led to your works being described as melancholic. Would you say that this is a fitting term to describe your work?
Yeah, I think that what Michael Gormley said is very eloquent. I don't think you could just call it melancholic. I
Hmm.
think what you read was, yeah, I think that that's a nice way to sum up how I think about painting.
Sure. And this idea of the lighting in your paintings being similar to that of the lighting which one encounters on an overcast day, Michael. Is that a conscious decision, or is that just something that's subconsciously comes out through your palette choice, your color choice?
No, it's pulling from what I find to be unique about Fenton Latour's work.
Hmm.
And so that's definitely a thing that I've borrowed from him that I implement in my own work.
Sure. Your love affair with simple floral arrangements seems insatiable. In fact, you are noted in saying, quote, I'll always be a floral painter. I can't put it down. I love it, unquote. Furthermore, you explain, quote, the idea of taking time to closely study a flower and capture all its subtleties, to work on complex color harmonies and textures, to tell the story of light as it passes over the petals, to help people see beauty that they may have overlooked. This is satisfying to me, artistically, unquote. What is it that continues to draw you back to flower painting?
Yeah, so I'm at a point in my life where that kind of love affair with flowers is it's fading. But as I walk through the garden here at the museum, it definitely comes back to me the beauty of that thing that I fell in love with, which is just nature in its infinite forms. So yeah, I think it's just the complexity of life and um, things around us. So I'll always be fascinated by that.
Sure. Now, Michael, the influence that your flower paintings have actually had on our tradition is quite outstanding. I see a lot of contemporary painters utilizing similar compositional arrangements, and particularly the rounded circular vases that you used to use in some of your early compositions. Are you aware of the impact that a lot of your floral paintings have had on your fellow painters?
Um, I- Maybe a little bit, but I wouldn't attribute it to anything that I've done specifically. I think it's just we all kind of study in a similar vein. Um, More information has become available, and I think I kind of helped push along the genre of flower painting into something that's, but it wouldn't be me necessarily. So there's many people who are doing the same thing. So
Absolutely. You're very modest, Michael. I understand in New York you purchased your flowers from the Chelsea Flower Market. When selecting your flowers, are you looking for certain color arrangements, shapes, and textures, or is your selection based on the specific species that are available?
yeah, so the Chelsea Flower Market was amazing when I was in New York. It was just because they imported flowers from all over the world, and I always just grabbed what I liked. It was all about colors and shapes, and I'm not much of you know, I don't study the flowers in particular, so it was definitely all kind of an abstracted fascination of the color harmonies.
Sure, sure. So it's all in the colors when you're looking to organize your composition. That's what you're looking at, just the relationship between color harmonies.
Yeah,
Sure. Two obvious issues with painting florals are that one, they are perishables, therefore they don't last very long, and two, they can be quite costly. I understand you recommend using real flowers to your students when possible. However, sometimes you will mix artificial flowers in a bouquet of real flowers. This is something which you don't recommend unless one understands the methods that manufacturers use to make their flowers appear real, and then one must use their knowledge of observing flowers from nature to make them look naturalistic. Can you comment on the ways you have worked around the cost of purchasing real flowers and how you manage to keep them fresh while painting them?
yeah. This is a long. I mean, I could get into this for a long time, so I'll keep it very brief. But just the challenge of painting something, if you're going to do it completely from life or from photos or from something fake or making it up from your imagination, it's all kind of they all oversect and intersect and become part of the same thing. So I used to be more strict about working exclusively from life. Now I do all kinds of stuff, and um, it's just kind of you. I paint from life. I paint from artificial intelligence, images, which is crazy, but I do it all. So it's just, I think in today's world, you just have to try to start to understand what our life is about and try to tell a story through your art.
Right, well said. You typically spend 3 to 4 days working on a floral still life. The first day is spent blocking in the first half, the second day the second half, and the third and fourth day for finishing and adjusting. This seems to be ample time for you to capture the florals at the height of their beauty before they wither. I understand throughout the painting process, the flowers tend to move up and open up, which forces you to draw upon your knowledge of form rather than direct observation. This skill seems to be what separates a novice painter from an experienced one, that is, their memory training. How much of your floral still lives are based on a direct mimesis of nature versus your knowledge of the flower forms?
Um, that you always want to be sensitive to nature, and but then at a certain point, you have to be able to take all of your knowledge and put it into the painting. So it's a balance. Um, you just have to go kind of figuring out your own process. Some people paint quick, some people take a long time. I become quicker as I get older, so it'll change. It changes
Sure,
all the time.
sure. So you tend to often alter nature in your floral compositions, Michael?
Not intentionally. I just there's the end result is definitely different than what I'm looking at, just based off of um, you know what I'm trying to put forth in the painting.
Sure. The way you handle the skin tones on models of different ethnicities is very beautiful. For example, your painting titled Karina's Rose, which depicts a portrait of a Honduran woman in profile with a white peony in her hair, is mesmerizing. Do you find painting models of different ethnicities to be more challenging?
No, I don't. I think that it's like anything. If you look at um, any flower, any chair, any person, it all kind of is spoken through physics and how our eyes interact with the surface. So I don't think it's any different.
Sure. I understand some of your paintings are depicted life size, so there is more of an intimate connection between the audience and the painting. Large scale paintings seem to be absent in your oeuvre. However, one that comes to mind is your large painting of the albino horse from your exhibition in 2018 at Maxwell Alexander Gallery titled Land Dwellers. Is working on a large scale something you see yourself doing more of in the future?
I love actually working larger, but I don't do it often just because it's so hard to find buyers for big paintings that
Hmm.
it limits you from doing it. So that's the reason for it.
Sure, and I did hear your discussion with James Zamora where you were explaining and discussing the issues of working large and how
Mm,
that can be a bit
mm.
of an issue when it comes to trying to sell work.
Yeah, absolutely.
In 2014, you began to share a studio in Chelsea with fellow painter Joshua LaRocque. Eventually, you needed more space and moved to East Harlem into a 1,500 foot square space, which was the former Janus Collaborative School of Art. Can you explain more about your time sharing this studio with Josh and how having a friend to bounce ideas off helped your work?
Yeah, so that period of time was really kind of formative for me in one way, just because uh, Joshua is so talented and being so close with another artist who shares so many things in common, it was really good because we would push each other and bounce ideas back and forth. So yeah, that was definitely another moment where things, I guess, got mixed up in my life, and I was having conversations that were difficult conversations, but it was pushing me to think about art differently, and try to see it from another person's perspective.
Sure. Now, I understand you prefer to complete all of your paintings from real experiences. Therefore, your preference is to work from life in order to have more of an intimate connection with the subject. However, you do not dismiss the use of photographs in the painter's process, as explained in a post by Matthew Innes, founder of Underpaintings magazine, on January 12, 2015, titled Michael Klein on Photographic Reference. In the past, you have quoted from former student of Bouguereau, Daniel Burley Parkhurst, in saying, quote, "There is the difference between the artist and the photograph, which sees only facts as facts, which, while often distorting them, does so mindlessly, and at best, when accurate, gives the bad with the good in unconscious impartiality. But back of the painter's eye that sees and distinguishes is the painter's brain, which selects and arranges, using facts as material for the expression of beauties more important than the facts," unquote. Indeed, the use of photography amongst traditional realists is a contentious issue. What is your own opinion of when a photograph should and should not be used?
Yeah, so I've touched on this a little bit in my last a couple of questions ago, but I don't think it matters what you use. If you want to be a purist and do a lot from life, that's definitely going to affect your painting in a certain aesthetic. But just the reality of the world we live in is you're bombarded with so many images anyway that you're very unlikely to view nature without seeing it through the lens of your phone or camera or whatever. It's almost impossible.
Of course, that makes perfect sense. In 2018, you had a solo exhibition at Maxwell Alexandra Gallery titled Land Dwellers, where you exhibited and sold many of the paintings that are based on this new theme of horses roaming the coast. How did you feel this show was received, considering your change in subject matter?
I wouldn't say it was super successful, but I was thankful to sell some work with the show, and my main concern was to be kind of real to the experience I was having in North Carolina, which is where the horses were. So as I move around, I continue to change, and I travel now to get subjects, and so things just kind of. I don't think I'll be the kind of painter that ever sticks to one thing ever.
Mm. Now, Michael, that was quite a change in your subject matter when you did go through that period where you were focused on the equine. Could you touch upon why that change in your subject matter occurred?
Yeah, so I've always had kind of this fascination with the market in the Southwest for like almost 10 years now. I haven't been part of it, but I've been interested by it. And so that continues to this day to be an interest to me. And so those are just two different, it's like that show was an effort to kind of fit into a contextual kind of situation. And so it was something that I was fascinated by, that I thought people would be keen to kind of purchase, I guess, or, have in their home or whatever.
Sure. Moving on. Your work seems to speak to two worlds, that of the academics and that of the impressionists. Would you say that both schools have helped you develop your painting technique and vision, and where would you situate yourself nowadays?
Yeah, so I came at it kind of backwards, but definitely I came at it from an impressionist angle into academic, but my work is definitely a blend of the two, and with many other influences, but those are my biggest. Looking at like French academic art and impressionist art, and then naturalism, of course, is kind of the result of all that.
Sure, and you did, I mean, your training did cover both worlds. I imagine that when you were working in Minneapolis, that you would have been exposed to ideas that a lot of the Boston school were exposed to regarding the big look and such. And then later through Jacob, you would have really had a thorough grounding in the purely 19th century academic rigorous technique as well. So you essentially got the best of both worlds throughout your training.
Yeah, I'm really comfortable with what I was exposed to. I think that there's some, it could be some potential disadvantages to having your mind full of all these different things, but I think that also is a testament to kind of, again, the world we live in, and I think it just the output then is something that I think ends up being kind of uniquely of our time. Again, just because you absorb everything and then you give back, and that's why photos and painting from life, whether it's impressionistically or academically or using new technology or whatever, it's going to be of our time if you just absorb it all and give it all back.
Sure, that's good advice, Michael. One artist who you have always been influenced by is James Whistler. What is it in particular that draws you to his work?
So Whistler was a big influence on me due to his aesthetic sensibility. He was very modern for his time. He was very against he was a reactionary against what was happening, particularly with interior design, and and understanding that and how that fits into a contemporary context was definitely why Whistler spoke to me so much. It wasn't even so much about his canvases as much as it was about his kind of vision of what art ought to be.
And I do see a lot of Whistler in your work, Michael, particularly through brushstrokes, a lot of the loose and tight areas. I
Mm.
see these parallels between you and Whistler as well. So, you can obviously see that influence coming through in your own work. Watching you paint is indeed a fascinating process, from your underdrawing to your scumbling of partially mixed paint with a short-handled brush to achieve the color harmonies of a flower, a plum, peach, or even an arrangement of random sticks. You are constantly attempting to match the color harmonies found in nature. Your brushmanship is second to none and has been referred to as, quote, the best in the business, unquote, by fellow artist Mario Robinson. I understand you have an extensive palette which exceeds over 20 colors, ranging between neutral and high chroma colors. You prefer earth-based pigments, however, you are open to using some of the modern pigments as well. The colors on your palette include raw sienna, burnt sienna, raw umber, burnt umber, yellow ochre pale, viridian green deep, cadmium yellow pale, cadmium orange, alizarin crimson, quinacridone magenta, cobalt violet, cobalt blue, ultramarine blue, with the addition of lead white and ivory black. Your preferred brands are Winsor & Newton, Old Holland, Rublev, and Michael Harding. Gamsol is used sparingly for diluting thick paint and for cleaning your brushes. Intermediary layers are painted with a fat medium comprised of equal parts linseed oil to daima varnish, and for final layers you use Rublev Oleo Gel to thicken up paint strokes and add texture. You prefer to paint on Dibond panels, which are prepared with either synthetic or lead-based primer, and your brushes include a variety of synthetic rounds with short handles. Can you explain your experience trialing various painting mediums and techniques over the years and how you arrived at such an extensive palette?
Yeah, I just for a limit of time, I guess. I think that one should be comfortable experimenting and um, just doing what you have to do to get the result that you have to get. So my palette has changed, my techniques have changed, my substrates have changed. Anything is it's just you arrive at who you are and how you paint just through natural kind of uh, finding your path, I guess. So it wasn't intentional. It's just um, how it came to be.
And nowadays, Michael, are you fixed on using a specific medium recipe, or are you still experimenting?
No, I still experiment. I've been using a lot more Demar varnish actually in my painting.
Sure. I understand you use the Munsell color system. What do you find to be the pros and cons of using the system, and would you recommend it to students?
I don't usually recommend it to students unless they're really interested in having a specific answer for things. But what I do find it most useful for is giving yourself a construct of a three-dimensional space and understanding how color operates in that. And then that in turn is useful because we think so three-dimensionally when we think about light and form that they all go together. So as far as understanding like the names of the chips and all that stuff, I don't recommend that to students,
Mm,
but I wouldn't tell them not to do it. I think they could do whatever they want.
sure. Watching your video demonstrations over the years, earlier in your life, you used to spend a significant amount of time creating a detailed linear drawing of your subject, which you would transfer to the support prior to painting. Whereas nowadays, you seem to begin with a block in, establishing your background first, and then moving on to analyzing the large shapes which you can see, working from the center of the composition out. Why did you turn away from the method of transferring a drawing, and how has it improved your work?
Yeah, so again, going back to that kind of idea of how things shift, it's not that I've not used the drawing method in my new paintings. I've just introduced a looser method to get the same end result. So um, it's like writing an outline for a book or something. You can do it uh, very rigidly, or you can kind of start to develop the book and then figure out the storyline. It's just a matter of choice and
Hmm.
preference.
Sure. And as you've got your painting mileage up, Michael, do you find that that actually comes with confidence, not having to be restricted to a closed composition that's delineated with a clean outline? With your experience in painting over the years, have you been able to just have more confidence in yourself, just drawing with the brush?
Sure. Yeah. Hmm.
Sure. When it comes to color mixing, I understand you prefer to not overmix your colors on the palette, but instead to mix lightly and then place the paint on the canvas. What are the advantages of mixing your paints in such a way?
Well, so that was learned from Richard Schmid, and I think it is testament to his really rich color and beautiful color. So I've watched him not overmix the colors, and ever since I saw it, I just made sure to be really careful about how I mixed my colors.
Sure. Speaking of Richard Schmid, Michael, did you ever have the opportunity to meet him during his life?
I did, yeah.
Oh,
Hmm.
wow. And could you just touch upon briefly what your observations of him and his work are?
Yeah, yeah, I mean that was a brief encounter, but definitely life changing again for me. And I don't want to get too into it because I wasn't one of his kind of students or anything of that nature. But I definitely crossed paths with him, and he was very influential in my life, um, and I think for so many artists too. It's not me, it's everybody.
Sure, absolutely. Regarding your palette organization, I understand you prefer to not create strings of color, but instead random puddles where you establish your middle tone, shadow, and light tone. This seems to be a far less complicated way of organizing your palettes rather than premixing all tints and shades of color prior to beginning your painting. Was this particular way of organizing your palette recommended by one of your teachers, or did you discover it through your own experimentation?
Yeah, so kind of touching on what we just talked about, it was a mix of the way I describe it in my classes now is it's a mix of what Jacob was doing and what I saw Richard doing. So um, that's where it's kind of developed from.
Sure. In the past, when comparing the way you were taught to paint during your student years to the way you paint today, you have identified that there is a difference. Today, you are more focused on capturing an aesthetic and mood, a visual poetry, rather than rendering the subject before you to the utmost detail. You're always trying to find the balance between the truthful statement versus the gesture. Can you elaborate further on how you have moved away from your academic training after your student years and whether this has compromised the technical side of your paintings today?
Um, I don't think it's compromised anything. I think the academic process is what it is, and I think that as long as you understand what you're doing, your paintings will be um, completely fine.
Sure. Now, Michael, you have released your own series of brushes with Rosemary and Co., which have been very popular amongst your students. How did you receive the opportunity to design your own brushes, and what did the process involve?
Yeah, so I love Rosemary and Company and Simi and everyone over there, and they're so generous to give me a line of brushes. Um, I didn't necessarily design them. It was I had used their brushes, and they basically just kind of put my name on the ones that I was using.
Sure. And it's interesting, Michael, because your preferred brushes are short-handled brushes. And I understand, like early in your career, you used to actually saw the ends of the brushes off. So what's your preference? Why do you prefer to use the short-handled brush? How does that benefit your work?
Yeah, I would do everything. I would extend them.
Yeah,
Uh, I would make them really long. I would make them short, whatever. Um, it's just it depends on what I'm doing, what I'm painting, and it's just become a thing, I guess, where I use shorter brushes
sure.
now.
Sure, and of course there are those photos that were circulating on social media quite a while back where you were actually experimenting. You had actually taped a series of brushes together, almost like Soroya did, and you were just painting with these really extended brushes in your time. Is that something
Yeah.
that you continue to do nowadays, or have you kind of moved away from that?
Every once in a while, depending on if I need to or not.
Sure. As mentioned previously, you mainly work on diabod panels. What has caused you to move away from working on stretch canvas over the years?
Yeah, I don't love stretch canvas just because of the fact that you have to stretch it. So that's what has caused that. So if I want to change the size, I can just cut it down, etc. So it's much easier to work on panels.
Sure. Do you tend to keep a sketchbook handy in your day-to-day life?
Not so much. Not like other artists from different periods or even contemporary artists. I I sketch a little bit, but it's not like I have it.
Sure, sure. At this point in your life, do you view drawing as a medium to create studies for your paintings, or are you interested in creating substantial drawings which are fully rendered?
Yeah, so the only time I ever do drawings is just mainly for thinking about compositions.
Hmm. Right, because you do find the point to be quite different than working with painting. You're really a shapes and masses kind of a painter. Drawing is something that I've heard you explain in the past. That's something that you kind of deter you a little bit, or something that maybe you found a little bit intimidating. Is that correct?
Yes, very much so.
Sure. So, in saying that, Michael, how did you go in your earlier days with Jacob going through all the casts? Was that something that you struggled with and the bark drawings, or was that were you able to
It
do
was
okay through that?
yeah, it was brutal. Yeah, it was tough.
Sure. In 2014, you won the Grand Central Atelier Still Life competition with your painting titled The Art Spirit. This is an incredible achievement as you were competing against some of the finest painters of our day, including Cesar Santos, Justin Hess, and David Gray, just to name a few. The conditions were also intensive, being a live 6 day, 48-hour competition. I imagine it must have been quite stressful having only 3 days to paint the still life. Can you recollect your memories of partaking in this competition?
Yeah, so it was a 6 day, either 5 or 6 day competition, and I actually painted every day. I think because what I did, no, I drew one day. Um, so it was a great competition. I loved it. It was really fun, and I would encourage more of it if I could. I think that it's important.
Sure, and it really was a beautiful still life that he had painted. It had a painter's palette on it with some colours set out,
Hmm.
which is quite
Yep.
quite sensitive and very extraordinary the way in which you had painted it. Are you aware, Michael, that the actual title of the painting? I'm not sure if it was a reference to the 20th century painter and founder of the Ashcan School of Painting, Robert N. Rye, who has the book The Art Spirit.
Mm.
Was that
No, it
a?
wasn't actually. No,
Oh, interesting. Okay,
it was more. So you had to give yourself like a you know a false name because you couldn't um, the judges couldn't know who was behind the work.
Hmm.
And so the reason why I called it the art spirit is because at that point I had come to faith, and so I was calling myself the art spirit for that reason.
I see, I see. Okay, that makes sense now.
Mhm.
In 2016, you were awarded the prestigious William F. Draper Grand Prize at the Portrait Society of America's International Portrait Competition for your portrait titled NYC Entrepreneur. Have you found that winning this award has helped solidify your reputation as a fine portraitist?
Every little thing helps. I don't think that winning the Draper Grand Prize is gonna just be like a tipping point where the orders start coming in. But I've done some fun portraits, um, you know, basically I'm sitting where I'm at the museum due to a portrait. So you can never say that it doesn't have like a ripple effect because things do matter. I'm not like working with a ton of clients for portraits.
Sure. Now, moving on, in 2017, you, along with your former business partners Joshua LaRock and Lewis Carr, started East Oak Studio in Raleigh, North Carolina. Assisted by the superb filmmaking of Joe Hawkins, East Oak Studio's mission is to steward beauty through art by offering high quality art demonstration videos and educate collectors and connoisseurs about contemporary realist art through the show which you produced called The Line. The show features some of the finest quality paintings that are created by contemporary realist artists. The Line has gained fans from all over the world and is truly a unique project. I understand East Oak Studio was launched through a successful Kickstarter campaign in July 2017, selling over $75,000 in 1 month. Can you explain how the idea for East Oak Studio initially came to be?
Yeah, so East Oak Studio is actually just kind of like a continuation of the video magazine project that I had done. This time I partnered with Josh and Lewis, and the line essentially was an idea I came up with to try to get again the idea of connoisseurship into people's homes, yeah, it's again very similar to what I'm doing today with the museum and trying to educate people about why realism matters. It's all kind of related. It manifests itself in different ways.
Sure. Now, Michael, today you are no longer affiliated with East Oak Studio. Would you care to comment on the reason why you decided to part ways?
Yeah, it just everyone kind of went in their own direction, and I had this project happening, and I think sometimes things are better, and you don't always have to pursue things in a group. I guess it's one of those things that just I think it's more suited to what Lewis is doing now, so he kept it going, and I encourage people to check it out if they want.
Sure, absolutely. And do you still keep in touch with Lewis and Josh these days?
Not so much, no.
Okay. During your time with East Oak Studio, you produced a documentary on the life and art of Jeffrey Larson. How did this come to be?
So Jeff was, again, he's been part of my life for a long time, and as we started trying to start to kick around ideas of who we could film and maybe put together something of significance, because Joe Hawkins was so talented, Jeff came to mind. We ended up kind of meeting up with him, talking about it. He has such a brilliant story. Joe really responded to it, and basically from there, between Joe and Jeff, they really like just took off, and Jeff had the story, Joe had the skills, and it was basically we supported the project, and it was really a beautiful documentary.
Sure, and it's incredible Joe Hawkins' filmmaking. When he was collaborating with you guys with East Oak Studio, he was able to bring the painted experience to communicate it so sensitively and truthfully through the medium film. He's really a remarkable filmmaker.
He is. He's incredible.
Now, moving forward into more recent times, in 2020, you conceived of the Pashard palette, and in 2021, you released it. What was your inspiration behind designing this new painting tool?
So yeah, Pashad palette had been something again, like everything else I do. It's kind of I had been fiddling around with it for years, and it got to the point where I was like, I just have to try to release this thing because if I don't, then it's gonna linger in my mind forever. And so this time I started the company with my wife, and we continue it today, and it's fun for us. And it was something that I really wanted to get to market. And so over the pandemic, I just kind of put myself in the position where I just worked on it and made it happen.
Sure, and it's incredible because it's such a unique tool in a sense where you can actually it bypasses all these stuff, the bits and pieces that you need with plein air painting, and it was something that you really designed out of necessity because I understand that was something that was frustrating you, the amount of bits and pieces that you needed when you went out plein air painting. Is that correct?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. During the pandemic, before we moved to New Salem, I had the pleasure and honor of living right there on the ocean, and the house basically overlooked a part of the. So in Massachusetts, you have the Cape, and it overlooked Buzzards Bay, and so I would walk out and paint the ocean a lot. And the wind, as you know, on the coast, it's just really hectic. So what people don't realize is that the Prashad bulb is actually invented out of necessity as well for when you're painting in a really windy situation.
Sure. And it is inspired by the 19th century idea that the plein air painters had of the thumb box. Is that correct, Michael?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Sure. Now, it's interesting because as part of the Pashad palettes business, you've also got other products that you've released, such as these lovely cowhide brush holders, brush wraps. You've also got a couple other palettes that you've designed. Is it the LU palette? Am I pronouncing that correctly,
Hmm.
Michael?
Yep.
Sure. Um, so that's interesting. That is that just something that you're doing as you go, just releasing more products? And is there going to be more products released in future?
Oh, I'm sure. Yep.
Fantastic, great, great. It's interesting your brush wraps in particular, Michael, and I want to just mention, and I know you have one. It's the Apollo Paint Carrier by Australian realist
Hmm.
painter Andrew
Hmm.
Bonneau.
Hmm.
You know Andrew, right?
I don't. No, we've never met.
Oh, but you've had contact just
Yeah.
online?
Hmm. Yep.
Yeah, sure, sure. So he's obviously got the Apollo paint carrier, and he's got some lovely brush wraps as well that he's doing. Was there
Yep.
much discussion between you two regarding the design of your own one?
Oh, no, not at all. No. I have one of his, but I never talked to him about
Sure,
uh, what I was doing. Yeah.
sure. Now, how has the Pashard palette been received by the public?
I think really well. I think in general, I just think that it's kind of an expensive item.
Hmm.
But I think the people who have kind of jumped on board with it, I think they enjoy it a lot from what I've heard. I haven't ever gotten any negative feedback, thankfully. Um, and that's the best kind of thing I could ask for. So if people don't like it, they're just not telling me. But I've had a lot of people tell me that they do enjoy it. So
Sure, and it's very unique in the sense that you are hand assembling each of these pallets. Is that right, Michael?
for the most part, yeah, it's a quick process. I have the pieces that put them together. It's so it's a combination of manufactured and like a loving kind of handmade item.
Sure. Beautiful. And I really like the way that the brushes actually slip into the back of the palette itself. So it's very convenient when you're having your
Yeah,
brushes on rest, you can
yeah,
just slide them in there. It's a lovely piece of engineering and very useful,
yeah.
it seems, for the painter. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Now, moving on, connoisseurship is something which you, along with many other affluent painters and directors of schools, are passionate about. I understand your hope is that the public will learn more about realist art through connoisseurship and will ultimately support the artists, as you state, quote, Every worthwhile art movement supports and encourages its members to become better at what they do, unquote. You are also zealous about helping collectors learn more about how realist artworks are made. In fact, you are an avid believer that paintings should not go straight from a gallery into a private collection, as this doesn't give the public an opportunity to learn more about the ideas and processes involved in making the work. You're noted in saying, quote, if the public doesn't get access to admire some of the incredible contemporary works being done, they will never know it's happening, unquote. Furthermore, you state, quote, it's just as essential to know about what makes a work of art successful as it is to simply love it, unquote. I agree entirely with these statements and believe that educating the public about the contemporary realist tradition is critical for its posterity. In your own experiences, do you believe that an impact has been made through your efforts with American Video Painting Magazine and East Oak Studio to educate the public about what makes a work of art successful?
Um, that'll be left up for the historians to decide, I guess. I just want to try to help as much as I can to get this kind of painting into the public, a public space, I guess.
Sure, sure. Well, in my observations, Michael, you definitely have had a huge impact, so you're on the right track.
Thank you.
What do you think are some of the things we can do to educate the public about our tradition?
I think just talking about it from the perspective of a painter, I think that's really essential. I think people forget that, um, not everyone understands what's going on. And so the more you can kind of share what's happening, people learn and they become connoisseurs and they start supporting it based off of kind of having a deeper knowledge of what it takes to make a painting.
Sure. And this is something that you've been in discussion with a lot of your contemporaries with over the years. I know Jacob and you in the early days used to discuss the problems of even having a museum dedicated to traditional realism. So it is something obviously that you've wrestled with your entire life.
Yeah, for about the last 20 years, I've been thinking about it.
Sure. One of the major breakthroughs which has been made in the last few years in promoting contemporary realism is due to the efforts of Eric Rhodes, publisher of Fine Arts Connoisseur magazine and CEO of Streamline Publishing. He founded the Figurative Art Convention and Expo FACE in 2017. I understand you were one of the artists who demonstrated for FACE 2019, painting a portrait sketch of your wife, Nelida, which was in fact the first live portrait painting demonstration you had ever done. What is your opinion of the event and what was your experience of it like?
It was good. I don't want to expand too much on it. The demo was successful. Someone bought it, and the crowd really loved it. My efforts leading up to that was I did a bunch of because I had 2 hours with the demo, so I did a bunch of 1 hour studies, so that if I did a 2 hour demo, I'd have enough practice doing a 1 hour study that I would have enough time talking and explaining. So that's how I practice for it. Eric does a good job with some stuff. He does a horrible job with other stuff, but that's just my opinion. So, I mean, the conference is good and I encourage that kind of thing. So everyone has to do their part.
Sure. Do you have much contact with Eric these days, Michael?
I don't, no.
Sure. Moving on, Vincent and Laura Barletta are two of your loyal collectors who first started collecting your work in 2005 and have since become one of the most influential collectors of contemporary realism. Inspired by the efforts of the art collectors and patrons Isabella Stewart Gardner and Peggy Guggenheim, you collaborated with the Barlettas in 2019 to found the New Salem Museum and Academy of Fine Art, NSMA. I understand the Barlettas have been part of the community in New Salem, Massachusetts for several generations. Vincent is the manager of NSMA and oversees the process of establishing the museum and academy, while Laura focuses on the design and curation of artwork shown in the museum. I understand you have been given the role of director of NSMA and you are assisting in developing the academy's curriculum as well as the lighting for the studio. Can you explain the genesis of NSMA and how you became involved with this project?
Yeah, I mean, I could talk on this forever, but so we've touched on kind of my passion for trying to um, help with getting this kind of art into the public spotlight. So Laura and Vincent had a very large collection that they've been developing over the last couple of decades, and they're now good friends of mine. And I felt comfortable enough to present to them the idea of trying to display the art, and it happened to resonate with them, and so they have put forth a great effort in building this new museum out and dedicating a lot of resources to it. And I'm excited for people to come visit when they can.
Sure. And it's interesting because your story or your connection with the Barlettas goes back to 2015. I believe you had a painting of Nelida showing in Arcadia in the front of the front viewing space, and I think it was Laura who saw the painting in the window, and she actually ran home and got her husband Vincent, and basically what happened was they came back and purchased that very portrait. Is that correct?
Yeah, that was in 2000, like I painted in 2005, so they purchased it in like 2007, actually.
Incredible. And since then, they've been
Mm.
collectors of your work.
Yeah.
That's great. Can you outline NSMA's mission?
I honestly won't be able to do it justice here on this podcast, but basically, we've mentioned it's to become a stronghold for contemporary realist art, to be a brick and mortar situation where collectors and enthusiasts can come see it in person and continue being influenced by it in a new way. Because if we allowed painting to only exist in a digital realm, I think that does it uh, injustice in the fact that paintings need to be experienced in person, and that's an important aspect of it. And so that's where we come in um, as educators in that kind of space.
Most definitely, and it's unique in the sense that it is also a an academy where one can come and seek training. Correct, Michael?
Yeah, so the academic portion continues to be kind of developed as we go. Now, the vision was really to share my experience that I had with my instructors and to do it in a way that can mimic that on a small scale so that people can come, master contemporary painters can come and spend a couple weeks in the area and eventually have students join them and live kind of in the space. So uh, that's kind of to come now.
Sure, and it is this beautiful atmosphere you have in the actual space. I mean, so far there've been artists from all over the world that have come and visited. I know recently you had actually an Australian realist. You had Vicky Sullivan come. You were out of
Yeah, yeah,
town, but I believe she met
yes.
Nelita.
I missed her. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. And it's lovely because I heard you mention that recently you had Stephen Assail come by, and you guys, you spend a day together, and you have dinner at night, so you really get to know, you really get to know the artist as well, and then become a collector of their work essentially.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Lovely. As director of NSMA, what do your duties involve?
At this point, we really are kind of just 24-hour caretakers. We live on the property. We take care of the collection. We greet guests. We kind of just do everything from opening and closing to doing tours and really essentially everything. So um, I'll be planning exhibitions in the future, and so there's a lot of um, stuff on my plate, but it's all fun.
Well, that sounds so exciting, Michael. So you're actually living on the same premises as the actual museum, is that right?
Oh yeah, yeah. As we record this, I'm in the third floor studio.
Oh, that's fantastic. And you're
Mm.
there full time?
Yes. Mhm.
Oh, fantastic. That's great. Now, what is your ultimate hope for NSMA?
I don't know. I mean, that's up to the Barlettas. I can't speak for them. I think it could. influence the art world, but that's again, I say it a lot, but you just have to kind of leave things up to the historians and however they decide things play out. That's whether it's influential or not. I guess we'll see.
Sure. Now, I understand the building has been renovated and skylights have been installed. Approximately 1 month ago, NSMA opened its doors. Are you pleased with how the museum has been received by the public thus far?
Yeah, we are. It's super fun to have the public in the space. There's a lot of people who are not familiar with this kind of art, so it's definitely doing its job by educating new people and sharing what's going on. Believe it or not, even with Instagram, it's still not a mainstream thing.
Sure, and I've heard you mention in the past that, I mean, Laura obviously is a lovely interior designer, but I mean, Instagram and photos online just don't do it justice.
Oh yeah, not at all. Yeah.
Now, moving on, have you seen the state of representational painting change since the days of being an art student at Water Street Atelier? And are you hopeful for the future of the tradition?
Yeah, I'm extremely hopeful. I think it always changes. It always will. I think that people are kind of scared because they think that AI is going to somehow disrupt um, the movement, or to displace artists completely. But I think that um, you know things, there's an ebb and flow, and it's definitely different, and it'll be different. It'll always be different each step of the way. So you just have to kind of enjoy the ride.
Sure. Well, it's interesting that you mentioned AI, and obviously this is a recent phenomena that's really had a lot of people talking. Uh,
Hmm.
but I mean, do you really think that it has any that it can compete with the human touch and that sensitivity of the human hand?
I think that we just have to watch and see what happens, because um, there's a lot of obviously it'll never be the same. But then, if you think about painting when they used to paint from life as opposed to painting from photos, that's also not the same. And so it'll continually change. And if you think about what humans make, that's not academic art, but like contemporary art, I do think that AI can easily replicate contemporary art. Will it represent like a Da Vinci? No, I don't think so. But I mean, it's gonna disrupt a lot of things, and people just have to be ready.
Sure. Michael, I understand you are now 43 years old. Are you still interested in traveling around the world and giving workshops? Or at this point in your life, are you ready to settle down and remain in New Salem, Massachusetts?
I'm definitely planted in New Salem. I'm not going anywhere. We are devoted to this 100%. So my wife and I foresee being here a long time.
Fantastic, Michael. Moving forward, in the past you have explained that Nalita is a, quote, sweetheart and has always been incredibly supportive, unquote. Did you ever wonder what your life would have been like if you never met Nalita?
Yeah, I do actually. I wonder it's like that when you have a successful marriage and you feel like you've been kind of brought together with your partner, and you've shared quite a bit of your life together, you do start to think like, not like that you don't want to be with the person. You just think, what would it have been like if I wouldn't have met my wife? And so, yeah, it's a fascinating kind of thing to think about. Um, Thankfully, that's not my day-to-day reality, but it's fun to just think about what would life be like without her.
Mm. Do you think
Yeah.
that you would have come this far if it wasn't
Oh,
for
never.
Nalita?
No, no, I'd be probably just, you wouldn't know who I was without my wife.
Wow, that's incredible, Michael.
Yeah. Mm.
How has the sacrament of marriage changed your life?
Yeah, it's definitely, as kind of I've alluded to, that I think there's advantages to it, and there's decisions that have to be made. But I think for me in particular, it really kind of forced me to um, grow up in many ways. It forced me to be committed to things that I probably wouldn't have been committed to. And so I think that it really kind of made me focus and not be, I'm super distracted as it is. So you can imagine if I wasn't married, I would be all over the place. So this has kept me kind of in the same lane, so to speak, and just forced me to be responsible.
Sure. And you and Alita have been married for going on to 20 years now, is that correct?
Yeah, we'll be soon.
Yeah, congratulations, Michael.
Yeah, thank you.
Nowadays, your energy is focused on NSMA, Pashard Palette, and developing video tutorials for your Pashard Palette Patreon account. What does a typical day of work involve for you?
Yeah, it's a lot of stuff, and that's thankfully I've been able to manage it. And a typical day is different every day, so it's hard to describe exactly how I do it all. But so now that we're actually literally open, I have a bit more of a schedule. Um, Friday through Sunday, I'm kind of present at the museum, um, but the museum's hours are 10 to 5. So I get up at 5 a.m. And so there's times when I paint um, for a couple hours before I have breakfast. And there's times when I paint in a couple hours in the evening. And there's times when I paint a couple hours during the middle of the day. I mean, it really is just a matter of how I feel.
Hmm.
And so I can manage because I'm in a really sweet situation where my greatest supporter in both regards, like my wife and my dearest collectors are very close to me, so I have a lot of support around me, and so they allow me to do what I need to do, and it's been really fast, wonderful.
That's fantastic, Michael. And do you have a day that you just have off to spend with Nalita, or are you
Yeah,
constantly work?
yeah, we have 2 days off. Yeah.
Oh, beautiful. So I understand you've got Fanti, who's your dog, who you
Mm-hmm.
recently joined your family. So I
Yep.
understand you've named him after Phantom Latour.
I have. Yeah, we did. Yeah. It was kind of it was yeah, anyway, it was going to be Santi actually,
Okay.
because but then I said, well, for that close, we got to name him after a painter. So how about Fanti?
Sure. It makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Uh, Now, Michael, approaching the end of the interview, every artist gets to a point in their life when they begin to question why they do what they do. What is it that you find keeps you painting, and do you believe that it will remain in your life forever?
Yeah, I can't speak to the forever. I think that it will, but um, there's a lot of things that can happen in your life. So I can't say that I'll I'll forever paint, but I think I will, just because it's been such a big part of my life. I don't see any reason why it would go away. But for me, it's definitely a calling, and I feel like I have to do it. It's my responsibility. It's my duty. So, and it's not like I'm not complaining. I enjoy it. It can be difficult, but it's definitely something that I feel called to. So I don't foresee it. I don't imagine me ever putting the brushes down.
Well, that's great to hear, Michael. Fantastic. Now, Michael, considering that some of your paintings have a narrative and are based on lived experiences, do you believe that a painter can ever really truly capture the experience, whatever it may be, as one remembers it? For instance, the person, setting, or atmosphere may be so vivid in one's memory, one may struggle to get this onto canvas as they may never be able to do justice to what they experienced. This may cause the artist to give up on the piece altogether and let the person, setting, or atmosphere be kept alive only in their memory rather than trying to capture it in a tactile sense. Because no matter how well one can draw, paint, or sculpt, the artwork will never be as beautiful as one's experience of the moment. This is perhaps the same struggle that the writer faces as words are inadequate and no matter how hard one tries to find the words, they never make the reader understand just how special the experience was. And if words are inadequate, then maybe painting is too. Have you ever faced this dilemma in your own work?
The easy answer would be to say yes, but the way I look at it now is when you're making the work, you feel that way. So if anyone's gotten to this point in the interview and there's, wanting a really, really good piece of advice, now that I've been painting long enough, I realize that my paintings are actually the memory. It's more accurate than when I was actually painting it. So um, the painting is the source of information now. So I'm thinking of like a portrait of my father-in-law. I remember painting him in person, but I don't remember it unless I have the painting. It's like the painting acts as the memory for me. So um, I think it can be beautiful in that way. That I think people compare their paintings so much to nature, but if you step away for more than a decade, you forget about what that day was like without the painting.
Mm,
So I think it can actually be really, really kind of, um, if and you can tell stories that are made up. You can tell stories that, um, yeah. So I think that it goes both ways. It's
hmm
the experience is obviously when you're experiencing it really profound, but if you don't capture that, then it fades and you never have that same experience again.
Sure, that's well said, Michael. Very beautiful. Now we've pretty much come full circle, Michael. I just want to touch upon nowadays you're obviously running the Pashad Palette Patreon account and you're putting out regular video content from time to time. Is that correct?
Yeah, I go live twice a week, and I have a pretty uh, a positive kind of experience of using Patreon. Now, um, the platform may change in the future, but I feel like I will always do video stuff at some point. So, but I'm very enthusiastic at this point about Patreon. So yeah, it's fun.
Sure. And as you said, video has been part of your life way back in since your childhood with your brothers, just making those skateboarding videos on
Yeah,
VHS.
yeah,
And I remember back in the early days of APVM, you being in your one bedroom apartment in Brooklyn, you had the GoPro strapped to your head, uh,
yeah, yeah,
painting
yeah,
away. It's
yeah.
you've come so far, and I mean you can see that through. I mean, this the impact that you've had on the tradition. And in conclusion, Michael, I would just like to thank you for your dedication to traditional realist art and for upholding the belief of beauty in your work as well as the work of your colleagues. Throughout the years, we have seen you continuously raise the bar of the flower painting genre, and you have gained the recognition of many collectors and galleries in the process. Not only have you contributed to the great tradition through your own paintings and teaching, but you have brought us into your studio and the studios of your colleagues through the high quality instructional documentaries which you have produced through American Painting Video Magazine and East Oak Studio, something which you are continuing to do nowadays with your Pashad Palette Patreon account. I congratulate you on becoming the director of the New Salem Museum and Academy of Fine Art, and I look forward to seeing what this next chapter of your life involves as you continue to spread hope through beauty throughout the world. And I just want to mention that I am personally so very glad that you are the person that is the director for the NSMA. I don't think could go to anyone that's more deserving, more passionate, and who has just dedicated their entire life to this tradition. And you've had a huge impact on my own life, Michael. And I just want to thank you so very much for this beautiful gift that you've brought to humanity through your life and through your work.
Well, thank you, Amelia. That's very kind and touching. I love to hear that it has a small, you know, effect on you. Oftentimes, you can think about the larger picture, but the individual is actually the most important. And so, if you just go one by one, if it's kind of a small influence, then I think over time it can start to be a big influence. So that's good
Sure.
to hear.
No problem. Now, Michael, just before we end, would you like to state your contact details so that listeners can reach you, and maybe those who want to subscribe or join your Patreon, how can they go about that? How can people reach you?
Yeah, it's pushardpallet@gmail.com is my business email. And you can find me on Patreon at Pushard Pallet or Michael Klein. They're the same account. And I really encourage people to try it out. Just if there's so many ways of connecting with artists nowadays that it can kind of get overwhelming. But I think that when the student takes the risk of trying to pay for something, then I think it's the responsibility of the artist or teacher then to put energy into that. So I've enjoyed doing it as opposed to like social media where it's just this vast kind of big ocean of people that you don't ever get to meet, whereas something like this can be much more intimate and much more useful for people.
Sure, sure. And Michael, you have a personal website as well?
Yes, it's michaelkleinpaintings.com.
Fantastic. And of course, you're on Instagram and Facebook. Not so much Facebook these days. It's not really, you're not updating it as much, but Instagram.
Definitely not Facebook. Yeah.
Sure, sure. Well, again, Michael, thank you very much for your time today. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. And as I mentioned, I wish you the very, very best with NSMA, and I look forward to following your career with the utmost enthusiasm. God bless you.
Thank you so much, Emilio. God bless.
No worries. Take care now. Bye-bye.
Bye.